Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've lived in this part of Washington my whole life, and I know these woods like the back of my hand, or at least I thought I did. This one afternoon, it must have been around 2 or 3 o'clock, my buddy and I decided to take the little aluminum boat out on the lake. It's not even a real lake, more of a big pond really, tucked in behind my property. We've fished it 100 times. It was one of those perfect quiet days, the kind where the water is like glass and the only sounds are the dragonflies buzzing and the occasional plop of a fish rising. We were just sitting there, lines in the water, not saying much, just enjoying the peace. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, this god-awful racket erupted from the shallows on the far shore. It wasn't a gentle splash, it was a heavy, violent thrashing, like something huge was just plowing through the water, not caring about the noise it was making. It was so loud and sudden, we both jumped. I nearly dropped my fishing rod. Instantly, every single bird on that lake lost its mind. Ducks shot into the air, squawking in a panic. A couple of great blue herons that had been standing like statues in the reeds took off with these loud guttural cries. The sky was just full of flapping wings and scared noises for a few seconds, and then, just as suddenly as it started, it all stopped. The splashing quit. The birds were gone. Everything went dead silent. Nor silent. You ever been in the woods when all the background noise just cuts out? No birds, no bugs, nothing. It's a heavy, waiting kind of silence that feels wrong. That's when the smell hit us. It rolled across the water, this thick, disgusting wave of stink. It was like a wet dog, but a wet dog that had been rolling in something dead and rotten for a week. It was so potent it made my eyes water and my stomach turn. I saw my friend's face go pale. He just looked at me and his eyes were wide. We didn't say a word. We didn't need to. That shared look said it all. We need to get out of here. Now. I started pulling the anchor rope, my hands fumbling and clumsy. My heart was hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. We both grabbed the oars and started rowing, not towards the noise, but back the way we came, towards the side where my house is. We were rowing fast, the boat cutting through the water, but it felt like we were moving in slow motion. The silence was still pressing in on us, and that smell was just everywhere, clinging to the air, clinging to my clothes. I don't know why I looked back. Maybe some stupid primal curiosity. Maybe I just had to know. I turned my head and looked over my shoulder, towards the far shore where the sound had come from. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees over there, casting long, deep shadows into the woods, and that's where I saw it. Standing just inside the tree line, right where the shadows were thickest, was a figure. It was upright, on 2 legs, and it was massive. I'm not talking tall and lanky, I'm talking wide. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, and it just had this immense, solid presence. It was just standing there, swaying ever so slightly, like it was shifting its weight from one foot to the other. The details were all swallowed by the shadows and the distance, but the shape was all wrong. It wasn't the sloped back of a bear. It wasn't the proportions of a person in a coat. This was something else. Something that shouldn't be standing on 2 legs like that. I couldn't see its face, but I had this overwhelming, chilling feeling that it was looking right at us, watching us flee. "Don't look," my friend whispered, his voice tight and strained. "Just row." I snapped my head back around and put my back into it. We didn't speak another word until the boat scraped bottom on my side of the lake. We hauled it up onto the shore, not even bothering to properly secure it, and practically ran up the path to my house. Once we were inside, with the door locked, we just stood in the kitchen, breathing hard. We tried to talk about it, but the words wouldn't come. "What do you say?" We eventually just settled on, "That was weird, and he left not long after. We haven't really talked about it since. It's like an unspoken agreement to pretend it didn't happen. But that wasn't the end of it. That was just the beginning of the real dread. It started a couple of nights later. I was asleep, and a sound jolted me awake. It was a roar, not a bear's roar, which is scary enough. This was deeper, more guttural, a sound that felt like it vibrated in your bones. It came from the direction of the lake, and it was loud, loud enough to rattle the window pane slightly. It lasted for maybe 4 or 5 seconds, and then it cut off. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I just lay there in the dark, frozen, listening. A minute or so later, from way off in the distance, from the hills deeper in the forest, another one answered. It was fainter, but it was the same kind of sound, a reply, and it's been like that ever since. Almost every single night between 1 and 3 in the morning, I'm woken up by that roar. Sometimes it's just one. Sometimes there's an answer. It's become this horrible nocturnal alarm clock. I'll be dead asleep, and then that deep, booming sound punches through the silence, and I'm instantly awake, my body flooded with adrenaline, lying there stiff as a board until it's over, straining to hear if there's more. I'm not the only one. I finally worked up the nerve to ask my neighbor, an old-timer who's lived here even longer than I have, if he ever heard anything strange at night. He got real quiet, and then he just nodded. He said he's heard it too, for years. He called it the night noise. He wouldn't say more than that, just changed the subject real fast. Another guy a few miles down the road, I ran into him at the hardware store. He mentioned seeing a big, dark shape moving through the trees near the lake one evening while he was checking his fence line. He said it was walking on 2 legs and moved into the thick brush before he could get a better look. He thought it was a person at first, but the size and the way it moved, he said it wasn't right. We all just kind of know, but nobody wants to say it out loud. It's this shared, unspoken terror, and it's not like that was my only brush with whatever this thing is. There was another time, back in January of 2006. I was driving home late from a friend's house. Must have been around 11 at night. It was pitch black, and I was on the old highway that cuts through the state forest. My headlights were on high beam, cutting a tunnel through the darkness. Up ahead, something moved at the edge of the road on the right. I thought it was a deer, so I let off the gas, but it wasn't a deer. It came out onto the road in 2 quick, powerful jumps. It didn't run across. It bounded. 2 leaps, and it cleared both lanes. It was upright, tall, I'd guess 7 feet easy, and it was covered in dark hair. It moved with a raw, muscular power that was terrifying. It wasn't clumsy, it was efficient. In the split second it was in my headlights. I saw its shape. Massive shoulders, a heavy torso, long arms. Its head was down, like it was focused on moving, so I didn't see a face. But I saw enough to know it wasn't an elk, wasn't a moose, wasn't anything from any book or documentary I've ever seen. It vanished into the trees on the other side before I could even process what I was seeing. I just drove the rest of the way home in a complete daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. So now, every time I go outside at night, I'm looking over my shoulder. I don't walk to the wood line after dark anymore. I keep all the outside lights on, and every single night, without fail, that roar comes. It's a constant reminder that I'm not alone out here, that something is living in these woods, something big, something that walks on 2 legs, and something that, for whatever reason, has decided to make its presence known. The not knowing is almost worse than the knowing. I lie in bed, listening to that sound echo through the valley, and I wonder what it is, what it wants, and if one night it might not just be satisfied with roaring from a distance. Story 2. It was a Tuesday, I think, around 8 o'clock, and it had just gotten dark. Summer here means the sun sets late, but once it's down, it's pitch black out here, except for the porch light. I was in the living room, tidying up after dinner, and my son, he's 8, was outside playing in the yard. We've got a big open space near the house where he likes to run around, and I always keep an eye on him from the window. That night, though, I heard the screen door slam shut and he came tearing into the room, his face white as a sheet. He was breathing hard, like he'd sprinted the whole way, and he just grabbed onto my leg and wouldn't let go. I knelt down and asked him what was wrong, and he was shaking. He said he heard a noise, something really weird and scary. At first, I thought it was just an animal. We've got coyotes out here sometimes, or maybe a bobcat. But he described it as a deep sound that started low and then got higher, like a whoop that rose up and made the hair on his arm stand up. He said it came from the trees at the edge of the yard, and it was so loud it echoed. I tried to calm him down, telling him it was probably nothing, but the way he was clinging to me, I knew it wasn't just his imagination. So I stood up and listened. At first, everything was quiet. Just the usual crickets and the faint rustle of leaves from the breeze. But then I heard it too. It was distant but clear, a deep guttural sound that started low like a groan and then rose into this high-pitched whoop. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before, not a coyote howl, which is more yippy and sharp, and not an owl, which is hooty and soft. This was primal. It sent a chill straight down my spine, and I felt my heart start to pound. I grabbed my son and held him close, and we both stood there, frozen, listening. The sound came again, maybe a minute later, and this time it seemed closer. It was moving, like whatever was making it was walking through the woods toward the house. I could hear branches cracking faintly in between the whoops, and the sound had this eerie quality that made the air feel heavy. My son started crying softly, and I knew I had to do something. I thought about going outside to check, but something in my gut told me not to. Instead, I locked the doors and closed the curtains, trying to act calm for my kids' sake. But inside, I was freaking out. We sat on the couch together, and I kept listening. The whooping sound happened a few more times over the next half hour or so, each time a bit closer, and it started to vary. Sometimes it was that rising whoop, other times it was more like a growl or a series of grunts. I remember my hands were sweaty and I kept wiping them on my jeans. My son eventually fell asleep against me, exhausted from the fear, but I couldn't relax. Every time the sound echoed through the trees, my body would tense up, and I'd hold my breath, waiting for it to stop. After a while, it seemed to move away, fading into the distance, but the silence that followed was almost worse. It felt like something was still out there, watching. I waited until I was sure it was gone. Then I carried my son to bed and tucked him in. He was out cold, but I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. What the hell was that sound? I've lived out here for years, and I've never heard anything like it. We've got deer, raccoons, even the occasional bear, but this was different. It was too intelligent, too purposeful. That's when I decided to look it up online. I went to my computer in the den. It was probably around 10 o'clock by then, and started searching for weird animal sounds Texas or deep whooping noise woods. At first I found nothing useful, just generic stuff about owls or foxes. But then I remembered hearing about Bigfoot or Sasquatch stories, and I thought, no way, that's just folklore. Still, I typed in Sasquatch vocalizations out of curiosity, and that's when I found it. There was a video on YouTube, some guy out in the Pacific Northwest who recorded sounds in the forest. He played this clip of a deep, rising whoop, and my blood ran cold. It was identical to what I'd heard. The same pitch, the same rhythm, everything. I played it again and again, and each time it sent shivers through me. I found other recordings too, from different parts of the country, and they all matched. Low growls that rose into high-pitched whoops, just like the one that scared my son. I sat there in front of the screen, my hands trembling. This couldn't be real, right? But the more I listened, the more it fit. I read descriptions from people who claimed to have encountered Bigfoot, and they talked about the same sounds, How it's not just random noise, but something that feels communicative, like it's trying to say something. I thought about the way it moved through the woods, getting closer and then backing off. And it hit me. What if it was checking us out? What if it was curious or territorial? That moment of realization was the most terrifying part. It wasn't just a weird animal, it was something I couldn't explain, something that shouldn't exist. I felt this cold dread wash over me, and I had to get up and pace around the room just to keep from panicking. My heart was racing, and I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see something staring back. But it was dark and quiet, and that made it worse. The silence felt heavy, like it was hiding something. I thought about our property, 500 acres of dense forest, with trails we walk on all the time. My kids love playing out there, building forts and exploring. But now, all I could think was, is it safe? What if that thing is still out there? And then I remembered the logging that's been happening nearby. Over the past few months, crews have been clearing land a couple miles away, and I've heard them at it during the day. What if they're pushing something out of its habitat? What if that's why it's coming closer to houses? I spent the rest of the night just sitting there, listening to every little noise, the fridge humming, the wind picking up. It all set me on edge. I must have checked the locks on the doors 5 times, and I kept my phone close just in case, but nothing else happened. The sound didn't come back, and by the time the sun started to rise, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. But the fear didn't go away. Even now, weeks later, I'm still on edge. Every time my kids go outside to play, I watch them like a hawk, and I've started hearing things in the woods again, twigs snapping, rustling, that I used to ignore. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to believe it was just a bear or something, but that sound, it's stuck in my head. I've played those Sasquatch recordings for my husband, and he says it's probably nothing, but he wasn't here that night. He didn't feel the chill that ran through me when I heard it move. So yeah, that's my story. I don't have any answers, and I'm not sure I ever will. All I know is that one evening changed everything, and I'm left wondering if we're really alone out here. If anyone else has experienced something similar, I'd love to hear it, because right now, I'm just trying to keep it together for my kids. Story 3. Hey, I'm Shannon Morgan, and I need to get this out because it's been eating at me for years now. This happened back in 2019 in Oregon, in the woods near some old railroad tracks I've known since I was a kid. Squirrel hunting was something my dad got me into when I was little, and I kept it up even after he passed, just to feel close to him. But that day, that one day, it all went sideways, and I still can't wrap my head around it. It was a late afternoon, the kind where the sun starts to dip low and the light gets all golden and soft through the trees. I'd been out since early, but around 4 or 5, I was making my way back toward my truck, following a path I could walk blindfolded. The air was cool, and everything felt normal at first, just the crunch of leaves under my boots, the occasional chatter of squirrels, the way it always is. But then I noticed something off. I heard footsteps that weren't mine, not like an echo or anything. This was separate, about 50 yards away, and it matched my pace perfectly. When I'd stop to listen or adjust my gear, the footsteps would stop too. When I started walking again, they'd pick up right where I left off. At first, I thought it might be another hunter, maybe someone messing with me, so I didn't think much of it. But the more it went on, the weirder it felt. I remember slowing down, trying to be quiet, and that's when I realized the forest had gone dead silent. No birds, no wind rustling the leaves, nothing, just my breathing and those footsteps. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the whole world. My heart started thumping hard in my chest, and I could feel this cold sweat pricking at the back of my neck. I've been in these woods hundreds of times, and I've never felt anything like that. This heavy, oppressive silence that made the air feel thick. I decided to call out just in case. I shouted, "Hey, anyone out there? I'm armed, so identify yourself." But there was no response. Nothing, just that eerie quiet, and those footsteps starting up again as soon as I moved. I picked up my pace, wanting to get back to the truck, but the footsteps kept pace with me, maybe even getting a little closer. Then this smell hit me. It was foul, like rotting meat mixed with something earthy and decayed. It was so strong it made my eyes water and my stomach churn. I've smelled dead animals before, but this was different, more concentrated, like it was coming from something big and close. I started walking faster, almost jogging, and whatever was out there did the same. I could hear heavy branches snapping nearby, like something massive was moving through the underbrush. Not the light crackle of a deer or the shuffle of a bear. This was louder, more deliberate, like it was pushing through trees without caring about the noise. By then, the sun was sinking lower, and the shadows were stretching long and dark across the ground. I felt this primal fear kicking in, the kind that makes your legs feel weak and your hands shake. I didn't see anything, no shape or figure, but I knew it wasn't human. No person could move that quietly and still make that much noise when they wanted to. I finally broke into a run, my backpack bouncing against my shoulders, my rifle feeling heavy in my hands. I didn't look back, I just focused on getting to the truck. When I reached it, I slammed the door shut and sat there for a minute, breathing hard, my whole body trembling. I could still smell that odor lingering in the air, like it had followed me. Now, here's where it gets even weirder. I'd planned to go night fishing that evening at a secluded lake not far from there. It was something I did every year around that time to honor my dad. He loved fishing, and we'd spent countless nights out on that water together. After what happened in the woods, part of me wanted to just drive home and lock the doors. But another part felt like I had to go, like if I didn't, I'd be letting fear win, and my dad wouldn't have wanted that. So I drove to the lake, my nerves still on edge. The image of those silent woods stuck in my head. The lake was about a 20-minute drive from the hunting spot, and by the time I got there, it was fully dark. The moon was out, casting a pale glow on the water, but the woods around the shore were pitch black. I parked my truck, grabbed my fishing gear, and headed down to the dock where I kept a small rowboat. The air was cooler by the water, and I could hear the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. It should have been peaceful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My skin was crawling, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something in the trees. I got into the boat and started paddling out toward the middle of the lake. The water was calm, and the only sounds were the dip of the oars and the distant cry of a loon. But then I heard this noise. It sounded like an ATV engine revving up, which made no sense, because there aren't any roads close enough for that. It was coming from the shore, deep in the woods. I stopped paddling and listened, my heart starting to race again. The noise stopped, and for a second, everything was quiet. Then I saw it. A glowing orb, about the size of a basketball, floating just above the tree line. It was this bright white light, and it moved slowly for a few seconds before vanishing into thin air. No sound, no trail, just gone. I felt a chill run down my spine, and my hands were sweating so much I almost dropped the oar. I decided to head back to shore. Whatever was happening, I didn't want any part of it. But as I turned the boat around, something emerged from the trees. At first, it was just a shadow, but then it stepped into the moonlight and I froze. It was huge, over 13 feet tall, with long, muscular arms and a broad chest. Its body was covered in dark, shaggy hair, and it stood there on the shore, arms crossed over its chest. But the worst part was its eyes. They were sparkling white, like they were glowing, and they seemed to lock right onto me. I couldn't move. I just stared, my breath caught in my throat. Then it let out this deep, guttural growl that echoed across the water, and it started beating its chest with its fists. The sound was primal, like nothing I've ever heard, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. And then, in my head, I heard it. Not with my ears, but like a thought that wasn't mine. It said, "Get out of here." Clear as day, no mistaking it. It wasn't a voice, but the meaning was there, and it felt urgent, threatening. I panicked. I started paddling frantically, my arms shaking, trying to get away from the shore. But as I did, I saw more pairs of those same white eyes appearing in the woods behind the first one. There were at least 3 or 4 of them, all staring at me from the darkness. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst, and I could feel tears welling up in my eyes from sheer terror. I was maybe 20 yards from shore when my boat hit something, a log, or maybe just my own frantic movements, and it capsized. I was thrown into the cold water, gasping for air. The shock of the cold made me gasp, and I struggled to keep my head above water. I could hear splashing and more growling from the shore, but I didn't look back. I just swam, my clothes weighing me down, my lungs burning. I made it to the opposite shore, scrambling onto the muddy bank, coughing up water. I was soaked, freezing, and trembling all over. I glanced back toward where I'd seen the creatures, but now there was nothing. Just darkness and the quiet lapping of the lake. I didn't wait around. I ran through the woods, branches scratching my face, until I reached my truck. I jumped in, started the engine, and drove away as fast as I could, not even bothering to grab my gear or the boat. I never went back to that lake or those woods. To this day, I can't explain what I saw or heard. People talk about Bigfoot, and I used to think it was all nonsense, but after that, I know it was real. The size, the eyes, the telepathic message, it's all burned into my memory. I've tried to tell a few people, but most just shrug it off or look at me like I'm crazy, so I keep it to myself. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still feel that fear, like something is out there watching, and I know I'll never set foot in that place again. Story 4. And it was June of 2018. I remember that specifically because my job had just switched to a 4-day work week, giving me Fridays off, and I was determined to make the most of them. That particular Friday, I decided to head up into the Sierra Nevada, south of Lake Tahoe. I'd found this decommissioned logging road on an old map, and it looked perfect for a long, solitary mountain bike ride. The kind of ride where you just get lost in your own head, you know? The kind that washes all the city noise and work stress right out of you. The morning was perfect, crystal clear, the kind of blue sky you only seem to get at higher elevations. It was cool, probably mid-60s, and the air had that clean, piney smell. I'd parked my truck off the main Forestry Service road around 9 in the morning, geared up, and started the long, steady climb. For the first hour or so, everything was normal. Just me, my bike, and the forest. I heard birds, the crunch of my tires on the gravelly dirt, the wind in the tall pines. It was peaceful, exactly what I'd come for. Around 10:30, I'd reached a high point and was starting a nice, gradual coast down the other side of the ridge. I wasn't pedaling hard, just letting the slope carry me, enjoying the breeze on my face. And that's when I first noticed it. The silence. It was like someone had thrown a switch. The birdsong just stopped, all of it. Not a chirp, not a tweet. The wind seemed to die down too. The only sound was the hum of my tires and the faint creak of my bike frame. It was eerie, but you know, forests do that sometimes. An animal passes through, a predator maybe, and everything goes quiet for a minute. I figured it was a bear. I'd seen bears up here before. You give them space. They give you space, no big deal. But then I heard the thudding. It was behind me, back up the slope. A heavy rhythmic thump, thump, thump. Like someone running, but not a person. A person's footsteps are quicker, lighter. This was deeper, heavier. Each thud was a distinct impact that I could feel in the ground, a vibration coming up through my bike. My first stupid thought was that it was another mountain biker, some maniac sprinting down the trail. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see someone. There was nothing, just the empty road winding back up through the trees. The thudding stopped. I slowed my bike a little, turning my head to listen, my heart starting to thump in time with the silence. For a few seconds there was nothing, then it started again. Thump, thump, thump. louder this time, closer and faster. It wasn't just running, it was sprinting, charging. That's when the fear kicked in, that cold, sharp feeling in your gut. I didn't know what it was, but something was coming for me, and it was big. I stopped thinking and just started pedaling. I mashed down on the pedals, shifting into a harder gear, my legs burning as I tried to pick up speed on the downhill. The road here had a gentle curve with thick timber on either side, a wall of pine and fir and manzanita. I risked another look back, still nothing on the road, but then from the corner of my left eye I saw movement in the trees, a dark shape keeping pace with me. It was running upright on 2 feet, but it was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing made me look like a child. It had these huge, rounded shoulders and long, swinging arms. It wasn't just running through the trees, it was moving with them, a part of them. Its strides enormous and powerful. It was a shadow, a blur of dark motion, but I could see its form. It was keeping up with me without even seeming to try. My breath caught in my throat. I was going maybe 15, 20 miles an hour downhill, and this thing was matching me stride for stride, just inside the tree line. I could hear it now, too, the sound of its feet hitting the earth, that same terrible thudding, and underneath it, the violent snapping of branches. It wasn't caring about stealth anymore. It was just plowing through the undergrowth. I panicked. I slammed on my brakes, skidding a little on the loose gravel. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I thought if I stopped it would stop. Maybe I was just frozen for a second. The second I slowed down, the thing in the trees slowed down. It didn't stop. It just adjusted its pace to mine. It was playing with me, stalking me. That's when I heard the growl. It started low, a guttural rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't like a dog or a bear. It was deeper, more resonant. It built in volume, rising from that rumble into this bark. It was a shout, a roar, but chopped off and harsh. The sound didn't just hit my ears. It vibrated in my chest. I felt it in my ribs, a deep physical pressure that made my teeth ache. I've never felt sound before, not like that. It was paralyzing. I took off again, pedaling like I was trying to escape my own skin. My vision was starting to tunnel, the edges going dark, my whole world narrowing to the strip of dirt in front of me and the thing in the periphery. The road began to climb again, a short, steep rise to a saddle between 2 hills. My lungs were on fire, my legs screaming in protest. I was standing on the pedals, throwing my whole weight into each stroke, just begging my bike to get me over that crest. As I climbed, the tree line on my left fell back, opening up into a patch of brushy scrub. And that's when it came out. It stepped out of the brush and onto the road, about 40 yards behind me. I looked back, and I saw it clearly for the first time, the full, horrifying picture. It was covered in hair, a reddish-brown color, like wet clay and rust. It was easily 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its body was immense, with a huge barrel chest and shoulders that were just impossibly broad. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and they swung as it ran, and it was running, not loping, not ambling. It was running with a powerful, focused motion, its legs driving it forward with terrifying speed. It was on the road now. It was right there in the open, and it was coming for me. It didn't stay on the road for long. It saw me struggling up the slope, and it cut diagonally across the road, aiming to intercept me at the crest. It moved with an economy of motion that was chilling. It wasn't a clumsy monster. It was an athlete, a predator. As it cut across, it let out another sound. This one was short, a single booming roar that was like a physical blow. It wasn't a challenge. It was a statement, a promise. I was so terrified, I almost vomited. I crested the saddle, and right there, where the main road continued, there was a narrow, steep trail veering off to the right. It looked sketchy as hell, probably a game trail or an old footpath, diving straight down the mountainside. I hadn't planned to take it. I didn't even know if it went anywhere, but it was my only option. I wrenched the handlebars and veered onto it, the front tire skittering on loose rocks. The trail was a nightmare, It was barely wider than my handlebars, strewn with roots and rocks, dropping away at a crazy angle. I was basically falling down the mountain, my brakes squealing, my body weight thrown back over the rear tire to keep from going over the handlebars. And that's when it got beside me. I felt a massive shadow fall over me, blocking out the sun. The temperature seemed to drop. I didn't turn my head. I couldn't. But I knew it was there, just off to my left, keeping pace with me even on this insane descent. I smelled it then. A thick, musky, earthy odor, like wet dog, but mixed with rotting leaves and something else, something pungent and wild. It was overwhelming. Then something hit the ground right next to my bike, not me, but the dirt just to my right. It was like a fistful of rocks, and soil had been thrown down with immense force. A spray of dust and pebbles pelted my legs and my bike frame. I don't know if it was a rock it threw, or if it had slammed its hand or foot down. I just know the impact was violent and deliberate. I screamed. I didn't even form a word. It was just a raw, primal yell of pure terror. I let go of the brakes and just plunged. I pointed the bike straight down the trail and surrendered to gravity. I was bouncing over roots, rocks slamming into my rims, my feet flying off the pedals. I was sure I was going to crash, but crashing seemed better than what was behind me. The crashing sounds continued behind me for a few seconds. The sound of something huge and powerful plowing through the brush, snapping small trees like twigs. And then it stopped. The sudden silence was almost as loud as the noise had been. I managed to get a foot back on a pedal and skidded to a shaky stop, my whole body trembling so hard I could barely hold onto the handlebars. I looked back, up the sheer slope I'd just fallen down. It was standing at the fork where I'd left the main road. It was just standing there, its chest heaving, its massive form silhouetted against the sky. It was watching me. I could feel its eyes on me, even from that distance. Then it raised both of its long, powerful arms straight up over its head. It held them there for a second, a terrifying, triumphant pose, and then it slammed them down. It didn't slam them on the ground. It slammed them together, against its own chest, I think. The sound was a loud, sharp crack that echoed through the canyon like a gunshot. It was a sound of finality. A period at the end of a sentence. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I turned and I rode. I rode like my life depended on it, because in that moment, I truly believed it did. My legs were shaking so violently I could barely keep my feet on the pedals. I was sobbing and gasping for air. I followed that trail for what felt like an eternity, but my bike computer later told me it was just over a mile, until it spat me out onto a fire road I recognized. I didn't stop pedaling until I saw my truck. I threw my bike in the back, jumped in, locked the doors, and just sat there, shaking, for a long, long time. I never saw it again. I don't know what it was. I don't use the name everyone uses. I just know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt, and what I smelled. The sheer size of it, the speed, the intelligence in the way it paced me, the way it cut me off. That sound, that chest-vibrating roar, the way it stood there at the end and made that final echoing crack. It's been years now. I still ride, but never alone, and never on remote trails like that. Sometimes, when I'm in the deep woods and the wind is just right, I'll catch a faint whiff of something musky and earthy, and my heart will just stop. I'll look over my shoulder into the trees, and for a split second I'll be right back there on that decommissioned road, feeling that shadow fall over me, knowing it's right beside me. I don't think that feeling will ever go away. Story 5. Okay, so I've never really shared this with anyone before, but I guess it's time to get it off my chest. This happened about, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years ago now, but honestly, it feels like it was yesterday. My ex-wife and I were on this road trip up the Northern California coast, just trying to get away from everything for a few days. We weren't together anymore at that point, but we'd stayed friends, and we both needed a break from work and all the crap life throws at you. So we decided to drive Highway 101, take it slow, enjoy the scenery. That day, we were cruising along the Avenue of the Giants, you know, that famous scenic route through the redwoods. It was one of those bright, clear summer days where the sun filters through the trees and everything feels peaceful and kind of magical. We had the windows down, the air smelling like pine and damp earth, and we were just chatting about nothing important, old times, music, whatever. The car was this beat-up sedan we'd rented, and it hummed along nicely. But every now and then I'd feel a little vibration that made me grip the wheel tighter. Not that it mattered. The views were stunning. Those redwoods are massive, like ancient giants watching over you, and it's easy to feel small and insignificant in a good way. We'd been driving for a couple of hours when we saw this gravel pull-off coming up on the left. It wasn't marked with any big sign, just a small, worn-out one that said trail access with an arrow. I glanced over at my ex-wife, let's call her Sarah, though I won't use her real name, and she nodded, saying, "Let's stop here. I need to stretch my legs, and I've always wanted to walk among these trees up close." So I pulled over, the tires crunching on the gravel, and we got out. The air was cooler here, shaded by the canopy above, and it felt like stepping into another world. The sounds of the highway faded quickly behind us, replaced by this eerie silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant bird call. We started walking down this narrow trail that wound its way into the forest. The ground was soft underfoot, covered in a thick layer of needles and moss, and the trees towered so high I had to crane my neck to see the tops. Sunlight speckled through in patches, but most of it was dim, like twilight, even though it was only midday. We walked for what felt like about 200 yards, maybe a bit more, just taking it slow. Sarah was ahead of me by a few steps, and I remember her suddenly stopping dead in her tracks. She turned her head to the right, into the denser part of the woods, and her body went rigid. "Do you feel that?" she whispered, her voice tight. I shook my head, thinking she was just spooked by the quiet. "Feel what?" I said, trying to sound casual. "It's probably just a squirrel or something." But she didn't move. "No, something's off, like we're being watched." I laughed it off, told her she was imagining things, but honestly, I felt a little prickling on my skin too. Not enough to worry about, though. Just that weird sense you get sometimes in the woods. We kept walking, but she stayed close to me after that, her eyes darting around. The trail curved slightly, and the trees seemed to close in tighter. I remember noticing how the air grew still, like everything was holding its breath. No bird song anymore, no rustling, just this heavy, oppressive quiet. I was about to suggest we turn back when it happened. Out of nowhere, this sound erupted from the woods to our right. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before, and I've been camping and hiking my whole life. It was loud, so loud it felt like it vibrated through my chest. The best way I can describe it is like a cross between a man screaming in pure rage and an elk bugling, but deeper, more guttural, and with this raw, primal edge that made my blood run cold. It started from what sounded like a distance, maybe a few hundred yards away, but within seconds, it felt like it was closing in fast, like whatever made it was moving toward us at an impossible speed. My heart slammed against my ribs, and every hair on my body stood up. I mean, literally, I felt the hairs on my arms and neck prickling like I'd been electrocuted. Sarah let out this choked gasp, and her face went pale. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. But I didn't have an answer. The sound came again, closer this time, and I could swear it was within 75 yards now. It wasn't just a howl. It had this echoing quality, like it was bouncing off the trees, and it sounded angry or hungry or both. I grabbed Sarah's arm, my fingers digging into her sleeve. "We need to go now." My voice came out shaky, and I didn't wait for a response. We both turned and started running back the way we came. The trail seemed longer now, every root and rock trying to trip us up. I remember the sensation of my feet slipping on the damp ground, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Adrenaline surged through me, making my legs feel like jelly, but also pushing me forward faster than I thought possible. Sarah was right beside me, her breathing harsh and panicked. As we ran, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. I didn't see anything, no movement, no shape in the trees, but I felt it. This overwhelming presence, like something huge and dark was just behind us, keeping pace. The howl sounded again, even closer, and it was so loud it made my ears ring. It had this piercing quality that cut through the forest silence, and I swear I could feel it in my bones. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Bear? No, bears don't sound like that. Coyote? Hell no. This was something else, something I'd only heard about in stories, but I didn't let myself think the word then. We stumbled out of the trail and onto the gravel pull-off, our shoes skidding on the loose stones. I fumbled for the car keys, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped them. Sarah yanked the passenger door open and scrambled in, and I slid into the driver's seat, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life, a sound that usually felt comforting, but now it seemed too loud, like it might attract attention. I didn't even bother with seatbelts. I just slammed the car into drive and peeled out of there, gravel spraying behind us. As we sped back onto the highway, I kept my eyes glued to the road, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. Sarah was curled up in her seat, her arms wrapped around herself, and she was shaking. Neither of us spoke for what felt like forever. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and our ragged breathing. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and I had to consciously force myself to ease off the gas a little because I was going way over the speed limit. After a few miles, Sarah finally broke the silence. "What was that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I shook my head, my throat dry. "I don't know. I really don't." We drove for another hour or so before we pulled into a gas station to calm down. I remember getting out of the car and my legs feeling weak, like I'd just run a marathon. We stood there by the pump, not saying much, just staring back the way we came. The forest looked innocent from a distance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd escaped something terrible. We cut the vacation short after that, drove straight to a motel and then home the next day. We never really talked about it again, not in detail. It was one of those things that hung between us, unspoken but always there. Years later, I was browsing online and stumbled across a video of supposed Bigfoot vocalizations. When I played it, my blood ran cold. It was exactly the same sound, that same horrifying mix of a yell and a bugle. I had to pause it and just sit there for a minute, my hands shaking all over again. But back to that day. We drove until we found a busy rest stop, and even then I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something following us. The fear didn't fade for hours. It clung to me like a cold sweat. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear that howl, feel that primal terror. We eventually made it back to civilization, but part of me never really left those woods, and that's it. I still don't know what it was, and I probably never will. All I know is that in the middle of those serene, beautiful redwoods, something let out a cry that felt like it came from another world. And for a few terrifying minutes, we were running for our lives. I've never gone back to that spot, and I doubt I ever will. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I'll hear a noise outside and my heart will skip a beat. Remembering that day, it stuck with me, this unresolved fear. And I guess that's why I'm writing this now, just to get it out there in case anyone else has heard something similar. Because if you have, you know exactly how I feel. Story 6. It was December of 1977, and I was 16 years old. My dad, my uncle, and a couple of their friends from the Hunters Club had the cabin in Garter, Massachusetts, for the weekend. It's way out there, right near the New Hampshire border, and in the winter, It feels like the edge of the world. The cabin wasn't much, just a small wooden shack with a wood stove, a couple of bunks, and the smell of old smoke and damp wool that never really went away. That particular day, a Saturday, the sky was the color of lead, and the snow was coming down in these big, soft flakes that piled up quick. We'd been cooped up inside most of the morning, playing cards and listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the window frames. My friend Mike, his dad was one of my dad's buddies, and I were getting restless. We were teenagers, full of that energy you only have at that age, and the idea of sitting around all day was torture. My dad must have seen it on our faces. He tossed me the keys to his old ski-doo and said, "Don't go too far and be back before dark. The radio's on channel 3 if you get into trouble." That was it. No big speech. Mike and I were out the door in a flash, pulling on our gloves and helmets. The snowmobile was cold, the seat stiff under my legs. I remember the engine coughing to life, that familiar two-stroke roar, shattering the quiet of the woods. Mike climbed on the back and we took off down Old Colony Road. It wasn't a real road, not anymore. It was an old logging trail, barely wide enough for a truck, and in the winter it was just a white ribbon through a tunnel of dark pine trees. The snow was deep and the machine bucked and slid under us. The cold air bit at any exposed skin, but under my suit I was sweating. We followed the road for what felt like a long time, the trees a blur on either side. The world was reduced to the roar of the engine, the sting of snow kicked up by the skis, and the endless white. We came to a place where the road curved, and on the left, the land opened up into a big swamp. Even frozen and covered in snow, you could tell what it was. The trees were thinner, mostly bare-limbed tamaracks, and scrubby bushes poking up through the ice. On the far side of the swamp, I could see the raised bed of old train tracks, the rails long gone, just a gravel berm cutting through the woods. I figured that was as good a place as any to turn around. The light was already starting to get that flat grey quality it gets before a winter afternoon gives up completely. I slowed the sled, the engine dropping to a grumble, and started a wide, careful turn in the middle of the road. That's when I saw it. It came out of the trees on the right-hand side of the road, just up ahead. My first thought was that it was a bear, a huge bear, but it was walking on two legs. It stepped out onto the road, and my brain just stalled. It was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing absolutely dwarfed me. It had to be 9 feet tall, easy, and it was built, not fat, but solid, like a power lifter. It must have weighed 500 pounds. Its entire body was covered in shaggy black hair, long and matted. It moved with a purpose, its arms swinging at its sides like a man's, not the clumsy waddle of a bear. It took 2 steps, just 2, but they weren't normal steps. They were these long, powerful, fluid strides that carried it all the way across the width of the road in a heartbeat. The movement was so fast and so smooth for something that big, it didn't seem possible. And then it looked at us, its head turned, and its eyes locked right onto mine. They weren't glowing red or anything from a movie. They were dark, deep set, and they held an intelligence that froze the blood in my veins. It wasn't the blank stare of a deer or the simple curiosity of a raccoon. This was a look of assessment, of recognition. It saw me, it saw Mike, it saw the snowmobile, and it understood what we were. The whole thing, from the moment it stepped onto the road to when it vanished into the swamp on the other side, lasted maybe 3 seconds. But those 3 seconds are burned into my mind with a clarity that still makes my hands shake. It disappeared into the thick brush and the snow-dusted trees of the swamp, and it was gone, just like that. The woods were silent again, except for the puttering of our idling snowmobile. I couldn't move. I just sat there, my hands glued to the handlebars, my heart trying to punch its way out of my chest. I could feel Mike behind me, his body rigid. He hadn't made a sound. I finally managed to turn my head. "Mike?" My voice was a croak. He didn't answer. He just stared straight ahead, at the empty space on the road where the thing had been. I looked back at the spot. The snow was churned up where it had crossed. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, pressing in on my ears. The only sound was the faint sigh of the wind in the pines. My training kicked in then. I'd been in the cadets for a couple of years, and they drilled land navigation and tracking into us. I made myself really look, at the tracks. They were footprints. Huge, human-like footprints. They were pressed deep into the snow, a good foot down. The stride was enormous. The distance between one print and the next was longer than I am tall. The prints themselves. They were shaped like a man's foot, but wider, much wider. I could see the impression of a broad heel and 5 toes. But the size, my God, the size. I could have put both of my boots inside one of those prints and still had room to spare. It wasn't a bear. A bear's back foot leaves a print that looks like a human foot, but its front paws are different, and it doesn't walk like that. It wasn't a moose. It wasn't anything I had ever seen in a book or a training manual. This was something that walked on 2 legs, was covered in hair, and was bigger and stronger than any animal had a right to be. The terror didn't hit me all at once. It was a slow, cold seep, starting in my gut and spreading out to my fingers and toes. The sheer size of it, the proximity. We were maybe 50 feet away. It could have covered that distance in a few of those strides. It could have been on us before I could have even thought to twist the throttle. I looked at Mike again. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. "We have to go," I said, my voice tight. He just nodded, a quick, jerky motion. I started the snowmobile again, the noise feeling obscenely loud. I didn't do a fancy turn. I just gunned it, spinning the sled around in a tight circle, the skis skidding, and pointed us back the way we came. I didn't look back. I just focused on the white path ahead, my body tense, expecting at any moment to hear a crash from the woods beside us, to see that massive, dark shape step out in front of us again. The ride back to the cabin was a blur of fear. Every shadow between the trees was a threat. Every snap of a branch under the snow sounded like a footstep. I pushed the sled as fast as I dared, the cold wind whipping tears from my eyes. When the cabin came into view, the smoke from the chimney, a grey smudge against the sky. I've never felt such relief. I skidded to a stop, killed the engine, and we both practically fell off the machine. My dad was on the porch, splitting wood. He took one look at us and set his axe down. "What's wrong? You two look like you've seen the devil." I opened my mouth to tell him, to spill the whole story, but the words got stuck in my throat. How do you say it? How do you tell your dad, a practical, no-nonsense man, that you just saw a 9-foot-tall monster cross the road in front of you? Mike was already shaking his head, pulling off his helmet. "Nothing," he mumbled, "just cold." He walked right past my dad and into the cabin. I stood there for a second, my legs feeling like jelly. My dad looked at me, his brow furrowed. "You okay, son?" "Yeah," I managed to get out. "Just a little spooked. Thought I saw something." He chuckled. "Probably a deer. They can look big in this light. Get inside and warm up." I went inside. Mike was already sitting on a bunk staring at the floor. He wouldn't look at me. For the rest of the weekend, he barely spoke. Whenever I tried to bring it up, even just to ask if he was okay, he'd shut down. "I don't know what you're talking about," he'd say, or he'd just get up and walk away. It was like he'd decided that if he never acknowledged it, it never happened, but I couldn't do that. I knew what I saw. I had the tracking training. I knew the gait, the footfall, the weight distribution. That wasn't any animal from around here. It wasn't any animal from anywhere. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I sat by the wood stove, staring into the glowing coals. The cabin was quiet except for the popping of the fire and the snoring from the bunks. I kept playing it over and over in my head, the way it moved, the way it looked at me, the intelligence in its eyes, The feeling of being seen, of being known by something that wasn't supposed to exist. It was the most profound terror I have ever felt. It wasn't just a fear of being hurt. It was the fear of having your entire understanding of the world ripped out from under you. The woods, which had always been a place of fun and adventure, had suddenly become a place of hiding, of secrets. Something was out there, something old and powerful, and it had looked right at me. That was the day everything changed for me. I never looked at the deep woods the same way again. I started carrying a gun whenever I was up in that area, a loaded .44 Magnum. It's probably useless against something that size, but it makes me feel a little less small, a little less vulnerable. And over the years, on other trips to that cabin or others nearby, I've heard things. We'd be outside at night, sitting around a fire, and from deep in the woods you'd hear it. Not a howl, not a scream, but this loud crying sound. It's a lonely, desperate noise, a sound that makes the hair on your arm stand straight up. It only ever happens when we're outside by the fire, like it knows we're there, like it's letting us know it's still around. My friend never did talk about it. We drifted apart not long after that. I think the memory was too much for him to carry, but I carry it. I carry the memory of those 2 swift steps, the dark, intelligent eyes, and the crushing weight of a reality I never asked to know. I carry the .44, and I carry the chill that runs down my spine every time I'm in those woods and the sun starts to go down, because I know what's out there, and I know it saw me too. Story 7. Okay, so this happened back in September 2015. I've never told this to anyone before, not in full detail, because honestly, most people would think I'm crazy or making it up. But I need to get it out there, and maybe someone else has been through something similar. I was solo camping in the Olympic National Forest, way off the beaten path. Not in a designated campground or anything. Just this unmarked pullout I found after driving for what felt like hours on these narrow, winding forest roads. The place was remote as hell, surrounded by dense spruce and hemlock trees, with a small stream bubbling nearby that you could hear if you listened close. It was supposed to be a quiet getaway, you know? Just me, my truck, and a little camper shell I'd set up in the bed. That day started out normal. I got there in the late afternoon, the sun already dipping behind the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. I remember the air was cool and damp, with that earthy smell of pine needles and wet soil. I set up my folding chair near the truck, fired up my little camp stove, and cooked myself some dinner. Just a simple meal of beans and sausages. Nothing fancy. As I ate, I watched dusk turn to dark, the sky fading from orange to deep blue, then black. At first, it was peaceful, the kind of silence that's so complete it almost hums. But after a while, that silence started to feel heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I've spent a lot of time in the woods, so I'm used to quiet. But this was different. It was too quiet, like everything had stopped breathing. Then I heard it, a rhythmic dragging noise coming from the slope behind my truck. At first, I thought it might be an animal, maybe a bear or something, but it didn't sound right. It was too steady, too deliberate, like something heavy being pulled over the ground, crunching through leaves and twigs. I stood up slowly, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I peered into the trees, but it was pitch black out there beyond the circle of light from my lantern. The dragging kept going, getting closer. I could hear it scraping against rocks or roots, this low, grinding sound that set my teeth on edge. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the noise, but the beam didn't penetrate far into the dense undergrowth. That's when I saw it. A massive, upright shape moving through the trees. My breath caught in my throat. It was huge, way bigger than any man, and it was dragging something behind it. As it stepped into a patch of moonlight, I saw it was a deer, freshly killed, its body limp and dark with blood. The creature moved with this eerie ease, like the deer weighed nothing. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, maybe 30 feet from me, and just stood there. I could see its outline against the darker shadows of the forest. Broad shoulders, long arms, and a head that seemed too small for its body. It was covered in dark, shaggy hair, and it stood perfectly still, like it was sizing up the area. My whole body went cold. I felt this primal fear wash over me, the kind that makes your stomach drop and your hands shake. I couldn't move at first, just stared, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then it turned its head, and I swear it looked right at me. Its eyes, I couldn't see them clearly, but I felt them, like 2 points of darkness fixed on me. It dropped the deer with a thud that echoed in the quiet, and then it took a step toward my camper. Each footstep was heavy, vibrating through the gravel under my feet. I could feel it in my bones. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over my chair. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I fumbled for the door of my camper shell, my hands slippery with sweat. As I climbed inside, I kept my eyes locked on the creature. It was still coming, moving slowly but deliberately. Once I was in the camper, I pulled the door shut and latched it, but it felt flimsy, like nothing more than a piece of aluminum between me and whatever that thing was. I crouched down, peering out through the small window. The creature stopped about 20 feet away and let out this low, rumbling exhalation. It wasn't a growl or a roar, more like a deep, guttural breath that seemed to vibrate the air. Then it reached down, snapped a thick branch off a nearby tree like it was a twig, and broke it across its knee. The sound was sharp, like a gunshot in the silence. It held the 2 pieces in its hands and started beating them together, this rhythmic thumping that sounded like drumsticks. All the while, it kept staring at me, its head tilted slightly. I could see its chest moving as it breathed, and the hair on its arms shifting with each movement. I was trembling so bad I had to press my hands against the floor to steady myself. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, and I could feel cold sweat trickling down my back. I remember thinking, this can't be real, but it was. Every detail was burned into my mind. The way the lantern light glinted off its dark eyes, the way its muscles flexed under that shaggy coat. It dropped the broken branch pieces and grabbed the deer again, dragging it closer to my truck. The deer's body left a dark smear on the ground, and I could smell the coppery tang of blood mixed with the damp forest air. Then the creature started swaying, this slow, deliberate motion from side to side. It raised one hand and struck a tree trunk repeatedly with its palm. Each hit was loud and solid, like someone hitting a drum with all their force. The tree shook, and I could see bark flying off. It did this for what felt like minutes, never breaking eye contact with me. I was frozen, my mind racing but coming up empty. What was it doing? Trying to scare me, communicate. I had no idea, but the fear was overwhelming, a raw, gut-level terror that made me want to curl into a ball and hide. Suddenly, it lunged forward, closing the distance to within 15 feet of me. I jerked back from the window, my heart leaping into my throat. Its breath plumed in the cold air, visible in the lantern light, a white cloud that hung between us. I could hear it breathing, this deep, raspy sound, and I caught a whiff of something rank, like wet fur and decay. It stood there for a long moment, just staring, and I could see its face more clearly now. It was broad and flat, with a heavy brow, and its mouth was slightly open, showing dark, thick teeth. Its eyes were deep-set and seemed to gleam with a kind of intelligence that made my skin crawl. Then it snorted, this loud, dismissive sound, and turned away. It grabbed the deer again and started dragging it back toward the trees. I watched, still crouched and shaking, as it retreated into the forest. But it didn't just leave. It started pacing parallel to my truck, maybe 10 yards away, moving back and forth along the tree line. As it paced, it let out these whooping sounds, not like any animal I've ever heard. They were deep and resonant, rising and falling in pitch, and each one sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. Between the whoops, I could hear the crunch of gravel under its feet, this steady, ominous rhythm that seemed to emphasize its presence. I stayed huddled in the camper, clutching a hatchet I kept for emergencies. My knuckles were white, and my arms ached from tension. I didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. The whooping and crunching went on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 or 30 minutes. Slowly, the noises faded, growing softer and more distant, until they were gone, swallowed by the forest. The silence returned, but now it felt even heavier, charged with the memory of what had just happened. I spent the rest of the night crouched there, too scared to sleep. Every little noise made me jump. The rustle of leaves, the creak of my truck, even my own breathing. I kept expecting it to come back, to burst through the camper door. My mind replayed the whole thing over and over. The dragging noise, the sight of that massive creature, the way it looked at me, the drumming, the tree strikes, the lunging. I felt completely helpless, like a mouse cornered by a cat. The fear was so intense it was physical. A tightness in my chest, a nausea in my stomach, a tremble in my hands that wouldn't stop. Eventually, the sky started to lighten, shifting from black to grey. Dawn came slowly, and with it, a bit of courage. I waited until the sun was fully up, casting weak light through the trees before I dared to open the camper door. The air was cold and fresh, but the camp felt different, tainted. I stepped out, my legs stiff and shaky, and looked around. That's when I saw the evidence. Deep impressions in the gravel where it had stood, each one the size of a dinner plate, with a shape that wasn't human. Drag marks from the deer led off into the woods, and there were broken branches everywhere, including the one it had snapped across its knee. Near the tree it had struck, the bark was torn away, and the wood underneath was splintered and raw. I packed up my gear as fast as I could, my hands still trembling. I didn't stick around to explore further. I just wanted to get out of there. As I drove away, the forest seemed to watch me, those dense trees feeling like a wall, hiding something I never want to see again. To this day, I can't explain what happened. Was it a Sasquatch? I don't know, but it was real, and it changed how I see the woods forever. The fear from that night is still with me, a ghost in the back of my mind every time I'm alone in the dark. Story 8. So, this happened a few summers back, and I still get this cold sweat just thinking about it. I've never really talked about it much outside of my wife Amanda and a couple of close friends. But I figured I'd share it here because, well, maybe writing it down will help somehow, or maybe not. Honestly, I don't know. But here goes. It was midsummer, and Amanda and I had planned this camping trip with some friends up at Cabin Creek Campground. We'd been looking forward to it for weeks, just to get away from the city and breathe some fresh air. The place was pretty popular, so by the time we booked, all the cabins were taken. We ended up pitching a tent in one of the spots near the trees, which was fine. We're used to tent camping. Our friends had their own setup nearby, and we spent the first part of the day just hanging out, grilling some food, and exploring the old logging roads around the area. It was one of those perfect sunny days where everything feels easy and relaxed. By late afternoon, we were all kind of winding down, and I got this itch to go fly fishing. There's a river about 6 miles from the campground that I'd heard had some good spots, so I decided to head over. Amanda isn't big into fishing, but she said she'd come along and just read by the river while I tried my luck. I packed up my gear, my rod, waders, a small tackle box and some water into my Pathfinder. It's an older model, but it's reliable, and we've taken it on plenty of trips like this. Amanda grabbed her book and a blanket, and we said bye to our friends, telling them we'd be back before dark. The drive over was nice. The road was gravelly and dusty, winding through these thick patches of forest. I remember the sun starting to dip lower, casting long shadows through the trees. It was still warm, but you could feel the evening coolness creeping in. We parked near a pull-off spot by the river, and the sound of the water was immediately calming. Just this steady rush over rocks. I helped Amanda set up her blanket on a flat, dry patch of bank, and she got cozy with her book. I could tell she was happy to just be out there, listening to the river and reading. I geared up and waded into the water. The current was strong but manageable, and I started casting, focusing on this one pool where I thought there might be trout. For about an hour, I didn't get a single bite. It was frustrating. But fishing's like that sometimes. You just have to be patient. I took a break after a while, wading back to the bank to grab a drink of water and check on Amanda. She was still reading, looking peaceful, and she smiled up at me. "Any luck?" she asked. I shook my head and said, "Not yet, but I'm going to try upstream a bit. There's a hole I remember from a map that might be better." She nodded and went back to her book. The sun was really starting to set now, probably around 8 o'clock. The sky was turning this deep orange and purple, and the light was getting dimmer. I decided to head upstream to this fishing hole I'd heard about. It was a bit of a walk, maybe a quarter-mile or so along the bank. The path was narrow and overgrown in places, with bushes and trees crowding in. I remember feeling a little uneasy, but I brushed it off as just being in a new place. I've spent a lot of time outdoors, and I'm not usually jumpy, but something felt off almost right away. As I walked, I started hearing these clicking noises. At first I thought it might be insects or birds, the usual forest sounds. But this was different. It was loud, like two rocks being knocked together, and it seemed to be coming from the trees on my left. I stopped a couple of times to listen, and each time the clicking would stop for a second before starting up again. It was rhythmic, almost like it was trying to communicate something, but I couldn't place it. My skin started to prickle, and I had this overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. It's hard to describe, but it was like someone had their eyes on me, and every hair on my arm stood up. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just my imagination, but the feeling didn't go away. I reached the fishing hole after a few minutes. It was a wider, deeper part of the river with a fallen log stretching across it. I waded in again, trying to focus on casting, but I couldn't shake that watched feeling. The clicking noises were still there, maybe a little closer now. I remember my heart starting to beat faster, and I kept glancing over my shoulder into the woods. The light was fading fast, and shadows were stretching everywhere, making it hard to see clearly. I decided to give it one more cast and then head back. I didn't want to be out there in the dark. That's when it happened. I was reeling in my line when I heard this loud crunch behind me. It wasn't a branch snapping underfoot. It was louder, like something big and heavy stepping on dry wood. I froze for a second, my blood running cold. Then, without even thinking, I turned and started running back toward the car. I'm not a runner, but I ran like my life depended on it. My waders were heavy and clumsy, and I stumbled a couple of times on rocks, but I didn't stop. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. As I ran, I risked a look back over my shoulder, and that's when I saw it. About 300 feet away, up on a hill to the right of the path, there was this thing. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair that looked almost black in the fading light. It had a human-like shape, but it was bulkier, with massive shoulders and no neck to speak of. Its arms were long and muscular, and it was moving up that hill at an incredible speed. I'd guess it was going 25 miles per hour or more, covering ground in these powerful, bounding strides. In seconds, it had gone from the base of the hill to near the top, and it stopped for a moment, crouched down, and just stared in my direction. I didn't slow down. I kept running, my legs burning until I reached the car. Amanda was standing by the Pathfinder, her book forgotten on the blanket. She saw my face. I must have been pale as a ghost, and her eyes widened. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice shaky. I couldn't get words out at first, just pointed back toward the hill. She followed my gaze, and then she saw it too. The thing was still up there, crouched on the hilltop, about 500 feet away now. It was just watching us, not moving, but you could feel its presence, like this heavy, oppressive weight. Amanda grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in. "What is that?" she whispered, and I could hear the terror in her voice. I shook my head, still trying to catch my breath. "I don't know," I managed to say. We both stood there, frozen, for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. The creature didn't make a sound, just kept watching us. Then, slowly, it straightened up and disappeared over the crest of the hill. We didn't wait around. I fumbled with my keys, my hands trembling so bad I could barely get the door open. We threw my gear into the back. I didn't even bother taking off my waders, and Amanda grabbed her stuff. We jumped into the car, and I started the engine, peeling out of there as fast as I could on that gravel road. The whole drive back to the campground, neither of us said much. Amanda was crying softly, and I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing following us. When we got back, our friends could tell something was wrong right away. We must have looked like we'd seen a ghost. We told them what happened, and they were skeptical at first, but the fear in our eyes must have convinced them. We packed up our tent in record time. It was fully dark by then, and every little noise in the woods made us jump. We decided to see if we could get a cabin for the rest of our stay, and luckily, one had opened up. We moved in that night, and I don't think any of us slept well. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle outside, had me sitting bolt upright in bed. The next day, we cut our trip short and headed home. I've never felt fear like that before. This deep, primal terror that just sinks into your bones. Even now, years later, I get nervous going into wooded areas, especially at dusk. Amanda and I don't talk about it much, but when we do, she says the same thing. It seemed as scared as we were. That doesn't make it any less terrifying, though. I still don't know what it was. A bear, some kind of animal, or something else. But the image of that thing racing up that hill is burned into my mind forever. I'll never forget it. Story 9. All right, I'm just gonna type this out. I've never posted anything like this before, but I've been reading stories on here for a while, and I figured it's time. I need to get this out, because it's been stuck in my head for over 20 years now, and it still messes with me. I don't talk about it much because people either don't get it or they think you're making it up for attention. But I know what I saw and heard, and I know how it felt, and it wasn't right. This was back in July of 2001. I was 15, a scrawny kid, all knees and elbows. My mum was dating this guy, Scott. He was an outdoorsy type, loved camping, fishing, all that. He had this plan to take a bunch of us up to the snowy range in Wyoming for a long weekend. There was me, my mom, Scott, and a couple of his buddies from work. We were set up at this decent campsite, not too deep in, but far enough that you felt away from everything. That whole day had been normal, hot, but the kind of dry heat you get in the mountains. The air smells like pine and dirt. We'd set up camp the day before, and this particular morning, after a breakfast of burned bacon and eggs cooked on a camp stove, Scott decided to break out the four-wheelers. He had two. One was a bigger one for him and his buddies, and a smaller one, an older Honda Recon, that he said I could use. I was pumped. I'd driven them before on his property, but never out in a place like this. The freedom was insane. The woods went on forever. These huge lodgepole pines and aspens, and the mountains just stacked up behind them, grey and rocky at the top. After lunch, Scott and his friends were going to go check out a fishing spot a few miles away. My mom was content to sit at the campsite and read. I didn't want to just sit around. I asked Scott if I could take the Honda and just explore the main Forest Service roads nearby. He gave me the usual talk. Be careful, don't go too far, stay on the trails, watch for wildlife. He showed me on a map where the main roads were and pointed to one. Stick to this one, he said. It loops back around. You can't get lost. I promised I would. But you know how it is when you're a kid with a motor between your legs and all that space in front of you. The main road was well-graded gravel, easy riding. I followed it for a while, but it felt too tame. I wanted to see something not everyone else saw. I came to a junction. The main road went left, wide and clear. The other road, barely more than 2 tire tracks in the dirt, veered off to the right and dipped down into a thicker part of the forest. It looked older, less traveled. The decision felt like a no-brainer at the time. I turned right. The change was immediate. The canopy closed in overhead, making it feel later in the day than it was. The sunlight came through in broken pieces, dappling the ground. The air got cooler, damper. The sound of the four-wheeler's engine seemed louder, like it was offending the quiet. I remember feeling a little thrill, like I was an explorer. I went slow, navigating around ruts and rocks, the smell of hot engine oil and crushed pine needles filling my nose. I'd been on this little path for maybe 10-15 minutes when the first feeling hit me. It wasn't a sound or anything I saw. It was just a feeling, a heavy sort of quiet. The bird song, which had been constant on the main road, had stopped completely. It was just the putter of my engine and the crunch of my tires. I remember looking up into the trees, expecting to see a hawk or something that had scared them off, but there was nothing. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. And then I started to feel watched. I know how that sounds, like a line from a bad horror movie, but it's the only way to describe it. It was a physical sensation, a prickling on the back of my neck, like someone was standing right behind me. My skin got tight and cold, even in the heat. I kept turning my head, looking over my shoulders, scanning the trees. Nothing, just shadows and trees, but the feeling didn't go away. It got worse. It felt oppressive, like a weight on my chest. My heart started beating a little faster. The fun, exploratory feeling was gone, replaced by a low-grade dread that was quickly turning into fear. My hands were sweaty on the handlebars. This is stupid, I told myself. There's nothing here. You're just spooking yourself. But my body wasn't listening. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, to get back to the main road, back to camp. I finally listened. I wasn't having fun anymore. I slowed the four-wheeler to a stop, the engine idling roughly. It was a tight spot to turn around, with bushes close on either side. I remember the process so clearly. Leaning my weight, craning my neck, trying to get the machine pointed back the way I came. I was halfway through the turn when I saw movement to my left. My blood went cold. It was a bear cub, a little black bear cub, maybe the size of a medium dog. It was shambling out of the undergrowth, and it was coming right for me. For a second, I felt a wave of relief. A bear cub, that's what I was scared of. But that relief lasted about half a second because where there's a cub, the cub didn't make a sound. It just came straight up to the four-wheeler. It didn't seem curious or playful. It was terrified. I could see its whole body shaking. It pressed itself against the front tire of the Honda like it was trying to hide. It kept looking back over its shoulder into the woods where it had come from. That's when the real fear set in. This cub wasn't just lost. It was running from something, and then I saw her, the mother. She came out of the trees like a shadow given form. She was big, a solid black mass of muscle and fur. She didn't charge out roaring. She moved with a terrifying purpose, straight towards her cub and towards me. I froze, completely. I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. I just sat there on this stupid four-wheeler, watching this bear come at us. She didn't even look at me at first. She went right to the cub, and she nudged it hard with her snout, pushing it away from my tire. The cub whimpered and scrambled off into the bushes. Then she turned her head. She looked right at me. Her eyes were these small, dark beads, but they weren't dumb. That's what got me. They were intelligent, calculating. She wasn't just a wild animal reacting. It felt like she was assessing me, making a decision. Her gaze was locked on mine, and in that moment I understood completely that I was in her world, and she was in charge. I remember the way her fur moved over her shoulders as she shifted her weight, the quiet, powerful huff of her breath. I could smell her, a wild, musky, earthy smell. My brain was just screaming one word: gun. Scott had a gun back at camp. I didn't. I had nothing. I was a kid on a quad. I remember my leg muscles were so tense they were trembling. my foot hovering over the gas pedal. I was too scared to even twist the throttle. I thought if I moved, she'd lunge. We stayed like that for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 5 or 6 seconds. The forest was utterly silent. Then, it happened. The sound started low, like a roll of thunder coming from deep within the earth. It was a roar, so deep I felt it in my bones, in my teeth. It vibrated through the four-wheeler, but it didn't stay a roar. It escalated, ripping up the scale into this unbelievably loud, high-pitched shriek. It was a scream of pure, undiluted agony and rage. It was the sound of something being torn apart, something dying in the most horrible way imaginable. It wasn't just loud, it was deafening. It felt like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the entire forest, squeezing the air out of my lungs. It lasted for about 6 seconds. I know because I counted them in my head, each one a lifetime of terror. When it stopped, the silence that rushed back in was almost as loud. The effect on the mother bear was instant. Her head snapped around, looking back in the direction the scream had come from, the same direction the cub had run. The intelligence in her eyes was gone, replaced by pure, primal fear. She looked back at me for a split second, and there was no threat in that look anymore. There was only a shared, understood terror. Then she turned and bolted, crashing through the brush after her cub, disappearing in seconds. I didn't think, I didn't plan. My body took over. I twisted the throttle so hard, I nearly flew off the back of the seat. The four-wheeler lurched forward, the back tire skidding in the dirt. I didn't care about the ruts or the rocks. I just pointed it back down the path and held on, the engine screaming almost as loud as I wanted to. I've never been so scared in my life. Every shadow was that thing. Every tree branch that scraped against my helmet was its claw. I kept expecting it to step out onto the path in front of me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just focused on the trail ahead. My entire world narrowed to that strip of dirt and the need to get to camp. When I finally burst out onto the main road, the sunlight felt alien. I sped the rest of the way, skidding to a halt in a cloud of dust, right in the middle of our campsite. My mom jumped up from her chair, her book falling to the ground. "What's wrong?" she asked, her face pale. I was shaking so bad I could barely get my helmet off. My hands were numb. I was trying to stammer out something about a bear and a scream when Scott and his friends pulled up on their four-wheeler. They'd been back for a few minutes. Before I could even form a full sentence, Scott looked at me, his face serious. "You hear that?" he asked. I just stared at him. "Hear what?" my mom said. That god-awful scream," Scott said, shaking his head. "Sounded like it came from over the ridge behind us. Sounded like an animal, but Jesus, I've never heard anything like that, like something was being murdered." My blood ran cold all over again. He'd heard it, from miles away. He'd heard it from camp. It wasn't in my head. I told them everything, the words tumbling out of me, the side road, the feeling of being watched, the cub, the mother bear, the scream. They listened. Scott's buddies looked skeptical, but Scott just listened, his expression grim. He believed me, he'd heard it too. The rest of the afternoon was tense. Nobody felt like going off on their own. We stayed around camp. As the sun started to get lower in the sky, casting long shadows, Scott said we should pack it in early the next morning. The mood was shot. Later, as it was getting towards dusk, Scott asked me to ride with him on the big four-wheeler to go check on something he'd seen earlier, a possible shortcut for the next day. I didn't want to go, I really didn't, but I also didn't want to be the kid who was too scared to leave camp. So I got on the back. We were on one of the main roads, up on a higher ridge that gave you a view across a steep valley to the next mountainside. It was thick with trees, a sea of green sloping up to a rocky outcrop. The sun was right at the horizon, lighting everything up in this orange-gold light. We were just puttering along when I saw it. Movement. On the opposite mountainside, I tapped Scott's shoulder and pointed, "Stop." He slowed to a halt. "What is it?" I didn't answer. I was squinting, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was a figure, dark, almost black against the sunlit trees, and it was upright, walking on two legs. It was huge. I'm not good at judging distance and height, but it had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. It wasn't just tall. It was massive, built thick and powerful. It wasn't walking, it was striding. Its legs moved with an impossible fluid speed, eating up the steep, rugged ground. It wasn't following a path. It was moving straight up the mountainside, through thick undergrowth and deadfall. And it was making noise, not loud, roaring noise, but the sound of things breaking. We could hear the snap and crash of branches, the crunch of stuff under its feet even from that distance. A bear on its hind legs wobbles, it's clumsy. This thing was stable. It moved with a purpose and a power that was efficient. It belonged there in a way that was terrifying. It was there for maybe 4 or 5 seconds. We just watched, completely silent, as this dark, giant figure powered its way up the slope with a speed no man or bear could ever manage. Then it disappeared into the deeper shadows of the trees near the top, and the sound of its passage faded away. The woods were quiet again. Scott finally let out a long, slow breath. "What in the hell was that?" he whispered. He wasn't asking me. He was just asking the air. I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry. I just kept staring at the spot where it had vanished. The image was burned into my mind. The sheer size, the effortless, powerful stride, the way it just tore through the forest like it was nothing. We turned around and went back to camp. We didn't talk about it on the way back. We packed up and left first thing the next morning. On the way out, driving the truck slowly down the main road, I saw something I hadn't noticed on the way in. Back in the trees, maybe 100 yards from the road, there was a cluster of aspen trees, and they were torn up, not broken by wind or lightning. The trunks were shredded, with long strips of bark peeled back and hanging down, and deep gouges dug into the wood. Some of the smaller trees were just snapped in half. It looked like something had taken out a massive, violent frustration on them. We didn't stop to look. I've spent 20 years trying to rationalize it. A bear. It had to be a bear, right? But bears don't scream like that. They don't walk upright with that kind of speed and stability on a steep slope. They don't look that bipedal and that scream. I've listened to every animal sound I can find online. Nothing, and I mean nothing, comes close to the sheer soul-chilling horror of that sound. It was wrong. It was a sound that didn't belong in this world. I saw something in those woods that I can't explain, something that saw the bear, and the bear was just as scared of it as I was, something that left its mark on the trees, something that walked like a man but wasn't, and I have no idea what it was. Story 10. Okay, so I've been living out here in Montcalm County, Michigan for about 5 years now, right on Church Road in Vesterberg. It's quiet. Mostly woods and fields, and I like it that way. But lately, things haven't felt right. I've had some weird stuff happen before, like finding big footprints in the mud behind the house, or hearing branches snap way out in the trees when there's no wind. Nothing ever prepared me for what went down this past late October, though. I still get chills thinking about it, and I haven't slept right since. It was one of those nights where I just couldn't fall asleep. You know how it is. Your mind won't shut off, and every little noise seems louder than it should be. The clock on my bedside table said it was around 2 in the morning. The house was dead quiet, except for the hum of the fridge downstairs and the occasional creak of the floorboards settling. I was lying there, staring at the ceiling, when I first heard it. This low, rumbling growl coming from outside. It wasn't like a dog or a coyote. It was deeper, almost guttural, like something big was pissed off, or maybe just communicating. Then came these grunts, short and sharp, like it was moving and making noise at the same time. My heart started pounding right away. I've spent enough time in the woods to know what most animals sound like, but this was different. It sounded too close, maybe just beyond the tree line at the edge of my property. I live alone, so there's no one to ask. Hey, did you hear that? It's just me and the silence. And now this. I didn't want to go outside, but curiosity got the better of me. Plus, I've got a shotgun by the door, and I figured if it was a bear or something, I could scare it off. I slipped out of bed, my feet cold on the wooden floor, and grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight I keep on the nightstand. It's one of those big ones with a beam that can cut through the dark like a knife. I didn't turn on any lights in the house because I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I just crept downstairs, my heart hammering in my chest, and unlocked the front door as quietly as I could. The moment I stepped onto the porch, the cold hit me. It was that crisp, late October chill that makes your breath fog up and the air smell damp, like fallen leaves and wet earth. But underneath that, there was this other smell, something rotten, like decay or old meat. It was strong, almost overwhelming, and it made my stomach turn. I've smelled dead animals before, but this was different, more pungent and lingering, like it was coming from something big and alive. I clicked on the flashlight, and the beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the yard. At first, I didn't see anything, just the familiar shapes of the trees, the gravel driveway, and the road beyond. Then I heard another grunt, closer this time, and my eyes snapped toward the woods on the other side of Church Road. That's when I saw them. Two glowing green eyes, way up high, higher than any deer's eyes would be. They were just hovering there in the blackness, unmoving, and they seemed to be staring right at me. My blood ran cold. I've seen eyeshine from animals before, raccoons, deer, even a bobcat once. But this was different. These eyes were bigger, brighter, and they had this eerie, almost intelligent quality to them. I froze for a second, my hand shaking so bad the flashlight beam wavered. Then I forced myself to steady it and pointed it directly at where the eyes were. The beam lit up the area, and that's when I saw it. A massive, dark, brown-haired creature standing on two legs, slowly moving across the road. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe more, with broad shoulders and long arms that swung slightly as it walked. Its hair was matted and thick, covering its body, and it moved with this slow, deliberate pace, like it wasn't in a hurry, but knew exactly where it was going. It didn't run or startle when the light hit it. It just kept walking, heading from the opposite side of the road into the woods on my property. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was it a bear? No. Bears don't walk upright like that for long, and they're not that tall. This thing was built like a person, but way bigger and covered in hair. It moved with a grace that was unsettling, almost human-like, but with a raw, powerful edge that made my skin crawl. I stood there, paralyzed, for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds. The smell of decay was stronger now, like it was coming from the creature itself, and I could hear its footsteps, soft, heavy thuds on the gravel road, then silence as it stepped onto the damp leaves of the woods. It disappeared into the trees, but those green eyes lingered in my mind. That's when the fear really kicked in. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the porch step, and fumbled with the door handle. My hands were so sweaty and shaky, I could barely get the key in the lock. Once I was inside, I slammed the door shut and turned the deadbolt, then checked all the windows and the back door to make sure everything was locked tight. I leaned against the door, breathing hard, my whole body trembling. I could still smell that rotten odor faintly in the air, like it had followed me inside. I didn't go back to bed. How could I? I just stood there in the dark, listening. At first it was quiet, but then I started hearing faint movements from outside, rustling in the leaves, soft grunts that sounded like they were coming from different directions, like the thing was circling the house. It wasn't loud, but it was constant, and it felt intentional, like it knew I was in here, and it was toying with me. Every time I heard a noise, my heart would leap into my throat, and I'd grip the flashlight tighter, even though I knew it wouldn't do much against something that big. I spent the rest of the night like that, huddled by the front window, peering out through the blinds. The sky started to lighten around 6 in the morning, and the sounds gradually faded away. By the time the sun was fully up, it was dead silent again, like nothing had happened. But I knew it had. The memory of those glowing eyes and that massive shape moving across the road was burned into my brain. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened out here. Over the past couple of years, I've found these huge footprints in the soft mud near the creek behind my house. They were way bigger than a human's, with 5 toes and a deep impression, like whatever made them was heavy. I've also seen trees with branches snapped off high up, way higher than a person could reach, and sometimes I'd find piles of twigs or rocks, arranged in ways that didn't seem natural. I never thought much of it at first, just figured it was kids or animals. But after last night, it all makes sense. I think this thing, whatever it is, uses my property as some kind of travel corridor. It passes through here, maybe on its way to somewhere else, and its presence is always marked by this eerie silence and that awful smell. The rest of that day, I was a wreck. I didn't leave the house until well after noon, and even then, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see those green eyes staring back at me from the trees. I walked down to the road where I'd seen the creature, and there were no tracks or anything. The gravel doesn't hold impressions well, but the air still had a faint whiff of decay. I checked the woods where it had gone, but I didn't venture too far in. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up, and I felt like I was being watched. I've talked to a few neighbors about weird stuff over the years, but most of them just shrug it off or say it's probably a bear. After this, though, I'm not so sure. Bears don't have glowing green eyes, and they don't move like that. I've been reading up on Bigfoot stories online, and a lot of them describe similar things. The smell, the eyes, the size. It's creepy how much it matches. What gets me the most is how it all just stopped when the sun came up, like whatever was out there vanished into thin air, leaving me with this gnawing fear that hasn't gone away. I've been sleeping with the lights on since then, and every little noise at night makes me jump. I keep thinking about how close it was, how it didn't seem afraid of me at all. It just went about its business, like I was nothing more than an obstacle in its path. I don't know what to do now. Part of me wants to set up cameras or something, but another part is too scared to even go outside after dark. I've lived here for years and never felt unsafe, but now I'm constantly on edge, like I'm waiting for it to come back. And the weirdest part, I can't explain it, I can't rationalize it away. All I know is what I saw and heard, and it's left me with this hollow feeling in my chest, like something fundamental has shifted in my world. That night, after everything quieted down, I just sat on the couch, staring at the wall until the sun rose. I didn't sleep, I didn't eat. I just replayed it all in my head over and over. The growls, the grunts, the smell, the eyes, the way it moved. It's all stuck with me. And even now, weeks later, I'll be doing something normal, like making coffee or watching TV, and I'll get this sudden chill, like I'm back there on the porch, frozen in fear. I guess I'm sharing this because I need to get it out, you know? Maybe someone else has experienced something similar, or maybe I'm just going crazy, but I know what I saw, and I know how it made me feel, scared, alone, and completely helpless, and that's something I'll never forget. Story 11. I'd parked my old Ford pickup on a scrubby patch of land off a dirt service road that cut through a particularly wet stretch of cypress swamp. My last check was a good 1.5 miles in. The walk out was always quiet, but this was different. I finished up with the last trap, reset it, and started heading back. The time was around 11:30 at night. The first thing that hit me was the silence. It was wrong. A Florida swamp at night is never quiet. You've got the frogs going crazy, the insects buzzing, the occasional splash of a gator or a fish. The rustle of raccoons or possums in the palmetto brush. It's a living, breathing noise. But as I was walking back, my boots crunching on the gravelly dirt of the road, I realized the sound was just gone. It didn't fade out. It was like someone threw a switch. One minute it was the usual racket, the next it was this heavy, suffocating quiet. My own footsteps sounded way too loud. I stopped walking, my hand going to the flashlight on my belt. I didn't pull it out yet. I just stood there, listening. Nothing. Not a single peeper, not a single cicada. My heart started beating a little faster, a dull thud in my ears that just seemed to emphasize the silence around me. I've been spooked in the woods before. Everyone has. But this was a different kind of spook. This felt like a violation of the natural order. That's when I saw them. Up ahead, maybe 50 yards down the road where the tree canopy closed in, 2 points of light. Red. They weren't reflecting my headlamp light back at me. I'd had it off for the last 10 minutes, letting my night vision adjust. These were glowing. A dull, deep red like coals in a dying fire. They were set wide apart and they were high up, way too high for a deer or a bear standing on its hind legs. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. My brain was scrambling, trying to file what I was seeing into a category I understood. A feral hog with some kind of disease? No. The height was all wrong. Someone playing a prank? Out here, at this hour? It didn't make any sense. Then, as my eyes adjusted more to the gloom, I started to make out the shape around the eyes. It was massive, a huge, dark, shaggy silhouette that blotted out the lesser darkness of the forest behind it. It was just standing there, perfectly still, at the edge of the road. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. The shape was vaguely man-like, but the proportions were all off. The shoulders were impossibly broad, and the arms were long, hanging down past its knees. It was covered in what looked like wet black fur or hair, matted and stringy. My hands started to shake. I could feel the tremor starting in my fingers and moving up my arms. This wasn't fear like when you almost step on a snake. This was a primal, gut-level terror, the kind that tells you you're not at the top of the food chain anymore. Every hair on my body was standing up. I could feel a cold sweat break out on my back, a stark contrast to the muggy air. I didn't know what to do. My truck was behind that thing. There was no way around it. The swamp on either side of the road was a soupy, impassable mire of water, mud, and tangled roots. My mind was racing, a frantic, jumbled mess. Run. No, don't run. That might trigger it to chase. Make noise. No, it already knows I'm here. Be quiet. It already knows I'm here. Slowly, so slowly my joints ached with the effort. I started to back up. One careful, deliberate step backward. Then another. I kept my eyes locked on those red pinpricks. They hadn't moved. I could feel the soft, uneven dirt of the road under my heels. I was afraid to turn my back on it. I've hunted all my life. You never turn your back on a predator you can't identify. As I backed away, maybe putting 10, 15 feet between us, my foot kicked a loose piece of limestone rock about the size of my fist. It skittered across the road with a loud, grating sound that made me wince. An idea, a stupid, desperate idea, flashed into my head. Throw the rock. Not at it, God no, but near it. Maybe startle it, make it move, see if it was just some weird bear or a trick of the light. My hand twitched at my side. I actually started to bend my knees, my fingers itching to grab the rock, but I stopped. A cold clarity washed over me. What if I pissed it off? What if that was the provocation it was waiting for? Throwing a rock at a bear is a bad idea. Throwing a rock at this... This felt like a death sentence. The thought was so visceral, so certain, that I immediately abandoned it. My stomach was in a tight knot. I just kept backing away, my breath coming in shallow, quiet gasps that I tried to stifle. I had backed up maybe another 20 feet. The shape was still there, a monstrous statue. The silence was still absolute. It felt like we were the only two things left in the entire world. Then it moved. It wasn't a step. It was just a slight shift of its weight. a rolling of those massive shoulders, and then it opened its mouth. The sound that came out wasn't from this earth. It started as a low, guttural growl that I felt in my chest more than heard, and then it erupted into a scream, a piercing, deafening scream that ripped through the suffocating silence and tore right through me. It was high and low at the same time, full of rage and hate and something ancient. It didn't sound like any animal I've ever heard. Not a panther, not a fox, not a bobcat. It was a sound that was meant to paralyze, to terrify, to strip you of all thought and leave you as nothing but a scared animal. It worked. For a full second, I was frozen solid, my muscles locked up, my brain just shut down. All I could do was stand there and absorb that horrific noise as it echoed through the swamp, bouncing off the cypress trees. The sound felt like it was physically pressing on me, vibrating my bones. Then the survival part of my brain, the part that's older than reason, kicked in. Run. I spun around so fast I almost fell. I didn't care about the mud, the water, the branches. I just ran. I ran like I have never run before in my life. I sprinted down that dirt road, my boots slipping in the mud, my arms pumping. I could hear my own ragged, panicked breaths, a harsh counterpoint to the memory of that scream still ringing in my ears. I wasn't thinking about my truck anymore. I wasn't thinking about a path. I was just running away from that thing. I crashed off the road and into the tree line, my only thought to put distance between me and it. Thorns from sore palmettos ripped at my jeans and my arms. Branches slapped my face, stinging my skin. I didn't feel any of it. I clawed my way through, my hands getting torn up, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to break out. I fell. My foot caught on a cypress knee, and I went down hard, face first into a patch of wet, rotten leaves and mud. The smell of decay filled my nostrils. For a terrifying second I was stuck, my body screaming at me to get up, get up, get up. I scrambled, my hands sinking into the muck, pushing myself back onto my feet. I didn't look back. I was too afraid of what I would see. I could feel it behind me. I could feel its presence. A cold, heavy weight on my back, a sense of being hunted that was so intense it was like a physical force. Somehow, I found the road again. I don't know how. I just burst out of the thicket and there it was. I could see the faint, dark shape of my truck further down. I put on a burst of speed I didn't know I had. My lungs were burning, my legs were on fire, but I didn't slow down. I reached the truck, fumbling for the keys in my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. I finally got the door open and practically threw myself inside, slamming it shut and hitting the lock button with a frantic slap of my hand. I did the same for the passenger door. I was gasping for air, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. I could smell the swamp on me, the mud, and the sharp metallic scent of my own fear. I shoved the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine roared to life, a blessedly normal human sound. My first instinct was to flip on the headlights, to flood the area with light and see what was out there. But my hand froze on the switch. What if the light attracted it? What if it was standing right there just outside the beam, waiting? The thought of those red eyes appearing in my headlights was more than I could take. So I left them off. I threw the truck into drive and stomped on the gas. The tires spun in the mud for a heart-stopping second before catching, and the truck lurched forward. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I just drove, hunched over the steering wheel, peering into the darkness ahead. I drove down that winding dirt road with no lights, guided by memory and pure adrenaline, my knuckles white on the wheel. Every shadow between the trees looked like a moving shape. Every rustle of the truck through the undergrowth sounded like something following me. It felt like an eternity before I saw the glow of a distant yard light, then the paved county road. I skidded onto the asphalt, the tires squealing, and finally I flipped on my headlights. The world suddenly existed again. I didn't slow down. I drove 15 miles over the speed limit all the way home, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. expecting to see a pair of red dots following me. I saw nothing. I got home, ran inside, and locked the door behind me. I didn't turn on any lights. I just stood in my dark living room, listening. My whole body was still shaking. I could still smell the swamp. I went to the sink and threw up, the acidic taste joining the rot already in my mouth. I sat in my recliner for hours, just staring at the wall. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those red coals in the darkness and heard that scream. The terror wasn't just the sight of it, or the sound. It was the feeling, the absolute certain knowledge that I was prey, that something out there, something that wasn't supposed to be real, had looked at me and seen food. It had hunted me. I felt its intention in that scream. It wasn't a warning, it was a promise. The sun came up. The world went back to normal. But I didn't. I sat there in that chair, covered in dried mud and scratches, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I had gone into the swamp a man who knew his place in the world, and I had come out knowing that I was wrong. There are things out there in the dark, in the quiet places, that we don't understand, and one of them saw me. I never went back for my traps. I never even went back to that part of the county. My truck stayed parked in my driveway for a week before I could bring myself to clean the mud off it. To this day, if I'm outside at night and the crickets suddenly go quiet, my heart starts to pound and my hands get cold. I'll never forget that silence, or those eyes, or that sound. It's been years, and I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, the echo of that scream in my head, convinced I can smell wet fur and rotting leaves. I was just a guy checking his traps, and I found something that was checking on me. Story 12. Okay, so this is something I've never really talked about outside of my family, and even then, most of them didn't believe us. But it's been eating at me for years, and I need to get it out there. This happened back in January of 2011. I was 24 at the time, and my sister was 22. We've always been close, and growing up in Minnesota, we spent a lot of time outdoors, especially in the winter. Snowmobiling was our thing. It was a way to blow off steam and just enjoy the quiet of the woods. That day, it was one of those cold, clear afternoons where the sky is this deep blue and the sun makes the snow sparkle like a million tiny diamonds. We decided to head out to the Chippewa National Forest, which isn't far from where we lived. We'd been there plenty of times before, so it felt familiar and safe. We packed some snacks, checked the fuel on the snowmobiles, and bundled up in our thickest coats, gloves, and boots. The air was so crisp it almost hurt to breathe, but in a good way, you know? Like it was cleaning out your lungs. We started off around 1 in the afternoon, following trails we knew by heart. The snow was deep and powdery, and the machines cut through it easily, their engines roaring, but then fading into the background as we got deeper into the forest. Everything was quiet, except for the hum of the engines and the crunch of snow under the tracks. My sister was riding ahead of me, and I could see her breath puffing out in little clouds. We weren't talking much, just enjoying the ride, taking in the tall pines, heavy with snow, and the way the light filtered through the branches. After about an hour, we reached a spot we both loved, a wide clearing near a ridge that overlooks a valley. We'd stopped there before to take in the view, and it never got old. The sun was starting to dip lower, casting long shadows, but it was still bright enough to see everything clearly. We killed the engines, and that's when the real silence hit. It's something people don't always get if they haven't been in the woods in winter. The way sound just drops away like you're in a vacuum. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just this heavy, almost oppressive quiet. We were standing there stretching our legs when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was a deer or maybe a moose. We'd seen plenty of those before. But when I turned to look, my heart just froze. There, maybe 100 yards away near the tree line, was this massive figure standing upright. It was tall, like at least 7 feet tall, and covered in this thick brown hair that blended right into the trees. It wasn't moving much, just standing there, and it had this human-like face with a broad chest, almost like a person, but way bigger and bulkier. I remember my breath catching in my throat, and I nudged my sister. She saw it too, and her eyes went wide. We both just stood there, staring, not saying a word. The thing is, it didn't look startled or afraid. It was watching us, and I could feel this intelligence in its gaze, like it was sizing us up. Its eyes were dark, and they seemed to lock onto mine for a second. I felt this chill run down my spine, and my hands started to tremble inside my gloves. It was so still, like a statue, but then it moved. It lifted one arm, slowly, almost deliberately, and reached out to grab a branch from a nearby tree. The branch was thick, but it snapped it off like it was nothing without making a sound. Then, in one fluid motion, it turned and vanished into the forest. I say vanished because it happened so fast and so quietly. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. There was no rustling, no crunching of snow, nothing. It was like it just melted into the trees. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, and my sister was breathing fast, her face pale. The silence felt even heavier now, like it was pressing down on us. I remember feeling cold, but not from the air. This was a deep, internal cold that made my stomach twist. We looked at each other, and I could see the same fear in her eyes. "Did you see that?" she whispered, and her voice was shaky. I nodded, not trusting my own voice. We both knew we had to check it out, but neither of us wanted to. After a minute, I started walking toward where it had been, my legs feeling like jelly. My sister followed, staying close. The snow was deep and every step sank in, making it hard to move quickly. When we got to the spot, we saw them. Tracks, massive barefoot tracks in the snow, clearly showing toes. They were huge, like twice the size of my boot, and they led off into the woods. I knelt down to get a better look, and my stomach dropped. The prints were deep, like whatever made them was heavy, and the toes were distinct, almost human-like, but wider and more spread out. I've seen bear tracks before, and these weren't it. Bears don't walk upright like that, and their tracks don't look like this. These were something else entirely. My sister pulled out her phone to take pictures, but the light was fading fast, and the shadows made it hard to get a clear shot. She snapped a few, but they came out blurry and dark, just shapes in the snow. We tried to follow the tracks a little way, but they disappeared into thicker undergrowth, and honestly, we were too scared to go further. The woods felt different now, darker, more menacing. Every little sound, like a branch cracking in the distance, made us jump. We hurried back to the snowmobiles, our hearts still racing. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see it again, but there was nothing. The ride back was tense. We didn't talk much, just focused on getting out of there. The engines seemed louder than before, and the cold air felt sharper, like it was cutting through me. I couldn't shake the image of that thing watching us, the way it moved so silently. It felt like we'd stumbled into something we weren't supposed to see. When we got home, we told our parents and our older brother. They listened, but I could tell they were skeptical. My dad said it was probably a bear standing on its hind legs, and my mom suggested it was a trick of the light or our imaginations. But we grew up in those woods. We know what bears look like, and we know what the light does in winter. This was different. We knew it in our guts. We never reported it to anyone official, partly because we didn't have good evidence, and partly because we were afraid of being laughed at. Who'd believe 2 kids talking about a Bigfoot in Minnesota? But I've thought about it every day since. That silence, those tracks, the way it looked at us, it stuck with me. I still don't know what it was, but I'm sure it wasn't any animal I've ever seen. And sometimes, when I'm out in the woods alone, I get this feeling like I'm being watched, and it all comes rushing back. Story 13. It was November, the middle of high-powered rifle season for elk. I'd been planning this trip for months with my brother-in-law, Mark. We'd gone over the maps of the Trapper Creek Wilderness in Washington a dozen times, picked out a spot we liked based on some old scouting photos. But then his kid got real sick, the kind of sick that puts you in the hospital, and he called me the night before, his voice all ragged, to cancel. I told him not to worry about it. Family comes first, you know. But I was disappointed. Hunting alone isn't the same. It's quieter. You get into your own head too much. But I'd already taken the time off work, packed all my gear, so I decided to go anyway. Maybe it was stupid, but at the time it felt like the right thing to do. Get out into the silence, clear my head. The morning was cold, the kind of cold that seeps right through your layers and settles in your bones. I remember my breath pluming out in front of the truck's headlights as I geared up in the pre-dawn dark. The air was so still, not a whisper of wind. I started down the main horse trail just as the sky was beginning to lighten from black to a deep, bruised gray. Everything was frost-covered, sparkling in my headlamp beam. It was beautiful, peaceful. I'd been hiking for a couple hours, taking it slow, my rifle, a .30-06, held ready, my thumb resting near the safety. The woods were waking up. I heard a few birds, the scurry of a squirrel. Normal stuff. Then I saw them elk tracks. Not just any tracks, but fresh ones. The edges were sharp, no frost in the depressions. And they were big, a bull and a good-sized one. A jolt of that old excitement went through me. This is what you wait for. This is the moment. The tracks led off the main trail, down a gentle slope into an old creek bed. The creek itself was mostly dry this time of year, just a few damp patches and some stagnant puddles. The bed was choked with these huge moss-covered boulders, some as big as my truck. It was tricky footing, but it was also quiet. The thick moss swallowed the sound of my boots. I remember thinking how perfect it was. I could move like a ghost in here, get right up on him. I followed those tracks for what felt like a mile, maybe two. I was totally focused. My world narrowed down to the next hoofprint, the next bend in the creek bed. The sun was fully up now, but down in that rocky trench, it was all deep shadows and a weird greenish light filtering through the tall cedars and hemlocks overhead. The air was colder down there, trapped and damp. That's when I felt it. A sudden chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was like a wave of ice water washed over me, from the top of my head down to my boots. Every hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood straight up. I've felt that before. Once about 10 years back, when a mountain lion had me pegged from a ridge above. It's a primal thing, a warning bell that rings in your DNA. Something is watching you, something that thinks you're food. I froze. My thumb clicked the safety off on my rifle. The sound was deafening in that silence. I slowly, so slowly turned my head, scanning the banks of the creek bed, the thick salal and huckleberry bushes, the dark spaces between the boulders. My heart was thudding in my ears, a loud, frantic drumbeat. I was looking for the sleek shape of a cougar, the glint of eyes, the twitch of a tail. I saw nothing, just shadows and leaves. But the feeling didn't go away. It got worse. It felt heavier, like the air itself was pressing down on me. Then the smell hit me. It's a smell I will never, ever forget. I've gutted a lot of deer and elk. I've come across weak old bear kills. This was worse. It was a thick, sweet, suffocating stench of rot, like a whole carcass pit, mixed with something else. Something musky and foul, like a wet dog that had been rolling in its own filth for a month. It was so strong it made my eyes water and my stomach lurch. I had to fight, not to gag. That's when I heard the first shuffle. It was a soft, heavy sound. Not a crackle of a twig, but a dull, weighty movement through the damp undergrowth. It came from my left, maybe 30 yards away, behind a wall of salal. It wasn't the light, cautious step of an elk. It was something bigger, slower. My breath caught in my throat. I tightened my grip on the rifle, the cold synthetic stock feeling slick against my palm. I was sweating now, a cold sweat that had nothing to do with exertion. Another shuffle, this one from my right. Closer, then another from behind me. They were surrounding me, moving in the bushes, just out of sight. I could hear them breathing, not panting like an animal, but deep, rhythmic, guttural breaths, like a man trying to catch his breath after running, but lower, more resonant. It was a sound that vibrated in my chest. I was spinning in slow, terrified circles, my rifle barrel following my eyes, trying to cover every direction at once, but I saw nothing. Nothing but shaking leaves, a branch swaying after something had passed. They were like ghosts. They knew the terrain, used it, stayed in the blind spots. I'd catch a glimpse of a dark shape from the corner of my eye, but when I snapped my head around, there was nothing there, just the empty forest, mocking me. The fear was absolute now. It wasn't just the spike of adrenaline you get from seeing a predator. This was a deep, sinking, soul-crushing terror. I was a mouse in a field, and the hawks were circling. I was armed. I had a powerful rifle in my hands, and I felt completely, utterly helpless. Whatever was out there, there wasn't just one of them. There was a family, a group. I could feel their presence, a palpable pressure from all sides. I remember my mouth was so dry I couldn't swallow. My legs felt like rubber. I was shaking, a fine, constant tremor that I had no control over. I was trying to think, to plan, but my brain was just screaming one word: run, 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 run. And then the sound started. It began close, maybe 20 yards to my right. A high-pitched, whirling sound, not a whistle. It was like, you know when a kid takes a rope and starts whirling it around really fast, and it makes that whir, whir, whir noise? That's exactly what it sounded like. A rope, or something like a rope, being spun through the air at an incredible speed. It was sharp, piercing, and it cut through the forest silence like a knife. It lasted for maybe 3 seconds, then stopped. A second later it came again from further away, maybe 100 yards to my left. The same sound. Whir, whir, whir. Then it was answered from behind me, even further back. It wasn't random, it was communication. They were talking to each other, and they were talking about me. That was the moment I broke. Every ounce of hunter's discipline, every bit of courage, just evaporated. Pure animal instinct took over. I turned and I ran. I didn't think about direction. I just ran back the way I came, back up the creek bed. My legs, which had felt like jelly a moment before, were suddenly pumping, fueled by sheer terror. I wasn't quiet anymore. I was crashing through the creek bed, my boots slipping on the mossy rocks, my breath coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. I didn't care. I just had to get out, and they came with me. I could hear them moving on both sides of the creek bed, keeping pace with me easily. They weren't running in the open. They were staying in the cover of the trees, but I could hear the heavy, pounding thuds of their footsteps, the sound of large bodies shoving through the brush. They were big. Whatever they were big. The whirling sounds started again, keeping time with my flight. Whir, whir, whir from my right, pinpointing my location. Whir, whir, whir from my left, answering. It was a net of sound, and I was trapped in the middle of it. In my panic, I veered to the left, thinking I could scramble up the bank and cut through the forest toward what I hoped was the trail. The moment my direction changed, the whirling sound from that side erupted, loud and frantic, right in front of me. It was so close, so aggressive, it felt like a physical blow. It wasn't just telling them where I was, it was a warning. Don't go this way. I swerved back to the center of the creek bed, my heart trying to claw its way out of my throat. The whirling sound immediately calmed, resuming its steady, tracking rhythm. They were herding me. They were using that sound to keep me on the path they wanted me on. I have never been so terrified in my entire life. It was a chase, but it was a controlled one. I was the prey, and they were the hunters, and they were letting me know it. I could smell them the whole time, that awful rotting stench carried on the wind of my own flight. I could hear their breathing, their heavy footfalls, the cracking of branches they didn't even bother to avoid anymore. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a quarter mile. My lungs were on fire, my vision was starting to tunnel. I just remember seeing a break in the trees ahead, a glimpse of the gravel parking area through the branches. With a final, desperate burst of energy, I scrambled up the last bit of the bank and stumbled out onto the flat ground. My truck was there, my beautiful, beat-up, rust-colored Ford truck. It was the most wonderful thing I have ever seen. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. I threw the rifle onto the passenger seat, clambered in, and slammed the door shut. I locked it, a useless, pathetic gesture. But I did it anyway. I jammed the key into the ignition, and the engine roared to life. Only then did I dare to look back toward the tree line. There was nothing there. The forest edge was quiet and still. The whirling sounds had stopped. The shuffling had stopped. The smell was gone. I sat there for a full 10 minutes, just gripping the steering wheel, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. I watched the tree line, expecting something, anything to emerge. But nothing did. It was just the quiet, peaceful woods again. I put the truck in drive and I got out of there. I didn't stop shaking until I was back on the paved highway, surrounded by other cars, by normal people going about their normal days. I never went back. Not to that spot, not to that whole section of the wilderness. I sold my rifle a month later. I haven't hunted since. People ask me what it was. A bear, a cougar, a group of hoaxes. I just shake my head. I know what I felt. I know what I heard. I know what I smelled. It wasn't any of those things. It was something that shouldn't exist, something old and smart and territorial, and it knew I was in its home. The part that haunts me the most, the part that keeps me up at night, isn't the fear or the smell. It's the intelligence, the way they work together, the way they used that sound to communicate, to track me, to steer me. They weren't just animals. They were something else. And the thought that never leaves me is this: they let me go. They chased me for a quarter mile. They could have easily closed in at any point, but they didn't. They just made sure I left, and I've always wondered why. Were they just warning me off, or were they just playing with their food before they decided it was time to eat? I'll never know. I just know I can still hear that whirling sound in my dreams. Story 14. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out there. I live in Ohio, out in the sticks on a wooded property with a long gravel driveway that crunches underfoot whenever you walk on it. I've been here for over 20 years, so I'm no stranger to wildlife. Deer, raccoons, even the occasional coyote passing through. But what happened on this one day in early January? I still can't wrap my head around it. It's left me jumpy, like I'm always waiting for something to happen again, even though it's been quiet since. That morning I woke up around 6 o'clock, which is pretty normal for me. It was still dark out, and the house was cold because I keep the heat low at night. I could see my breath in the air when I sat up in bed. My dog, a mutt I've had for years, was curled up at the foot of the bed, but he was already awake, ears perked up like he heard something. Normally he's pretty chill, but lately he'd been acting skittish, growling at walls for no reason I could see. I didn't think much of it at first. Just figured it was the wind or an animal outside. I got up to make coffee, my feet cold on the hardwood floors. The house is old, so it creaks a lot, but I'm used to that. As I was waiting for the coffee to brew, I heard it. A soft, crunching sound from outside, like someone was walking on the gravel driveway. I froze for a second, listening. It wasn't the usual patter of deer or the scuffle of a possum. This was heavier, more deliberate. I peeked out the kitchen window, but it was pitch black out there, and the motion sensor light by the garage hadn't come on. I figured maybe it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks. So I shook it off and poured my coffee, but the feeling didn't go away. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, and my dog started to growl low in his throat. He was staring at the back door, his hackles up. That got my attention because he doesn't do that unless something's really wrong. I got up and looked out the window again, but still nothing. The snow on the ground was fresh from a couple days ago, so it was all white and pristine. No tracks that I could see from where I was. Around 7 o'clock, the sun started to come up, casting a grey light over everything. I decided to take my dog out for his morning business, but he hesitated at the door, whining. I had to almost drag him outside. The air was biting cold, and I could see my breath fogging up. As we stepped onto the porch, I noticed something odd. The gravel near the garage was disturbed, like something big had been standing there. Not crushed, but shifted, with deeper impressions than a deer would make. My dog pulled on his leash, sniffing the air, and then he started barking like crazy toward the tree line. I looked, but all I saw were the bare branches moving in the wind. I called him back and we went inside, but I felt uneasy, like we were being watched. The rest of the morning was pretty normal. I did some chores around the house, tried to distract myself, but every little noise made me jump. Around 10 o'clock I was in the living room, putting away some books, when I heard a low thump against the side of the house. It wasn't loud, but it was solid, like something had bumped into the wall. My heart skipped a beat and I rushed to the window. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, a dark, oversized figure darting back into the trees. It was too quick to make out details, but it was tall, way taller than a person, and it moved in a way that wasn't human. It didn't run, it sort of loped, like it was effortless. I stood there for a minute, my hands trembling, before I forced myself to look away. I told myself it was probably a bear, even though bears around here are usually smaller and don't act like that. I decided to check outside, but I grabbed my shotgun first. I keep it for protection, though I've never had to use it seriously. I stepped out onto the porch, the cold seeping through my boots. The snow was still mostly untouched, but as I walked around the house, I saw them. Footprints, huge ones, about 16 inches long, with wide heels, like nothing I'd ever seen. They led from the tree line to the house and back, and they were deep, like whatever made them was heavy. My stomach churned. I've seen bear tracks before, but these were different, more human-like, but not quite. The toes were spread out and the stride was long. I followed them for a bit, but they disappeared into the woods, and I wasn't about to go chasing after whatever it was. Back inside, I tried to calm down. I made some lunch, but I couldn't eat much. My dog was glued to my side, his ears twitching at every sound. Around 2 in the afternoon, I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard breathing outside the window. Not heavy panting, but slow, deep breaths, like someone was standing right there. I froze, my hands in the soapy water, and slowly turned to look. The window was above the sink, and the blinds were partly open. I didn't see anything at first, but then I heard it again, a low, rhythmic sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. I crept closer, my heart pounding, and peeked through the slats. Nothing. Just the snowy yard and the trees beyond. But the feeling of being watched was so intense, it felt like a weight on my chest. I spent the next few hours trying to keep busy, but I was on edge. I closed all the blinds, something I'd started doing over the past few weeks because of strange noises at night. Around 5 o'clock, it started getting dark again, and I turned on the TV to distract myself. I was sitting in the living room, the room dark except for the glow from the screen, watching some random show. My dog was curled up next to me, but he was tense, his eyes fixed on the window behind me. Then it happened. I saw movement in the reflection on the TV screen, a shift in the darkness outside the window. I turned slowly, my blood running cold, and there it was. A face pressed against the glass. It was huge, with dark matted hair covering most of it, but I could see the eyes. Red, glowing eyes that seemed to reflect the light from the TV. They were focused right on me, unblinking. The head was massive, way bigger than a human's, and it was just hovering there like it was studying me. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, my breath caught in my throat. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a few seconds. Then, slowly, it pulled back, disappearing into the night. I sat there shaking before I finally managed to get up and look out the window. Nothing. Just the empty darkness and the faint outline of trees. I rushed to lock all the doors and windows, my hands fumbling with the latches. My dog was whining, pressing against my legs. I knew I had to do something, so I grabbed my shotgun again and stood by the back door, listening. For a while, it was quiet, but then I heard footsteps circling the house. Heavy, deliberate steps that crunched in the snow. They weren't fast. They were slow, like whatever it was taking its time. I could hear it moving around the perimeter, sometimes stopping, like it was listening or waiting. Around 8 o'clock, I heard a loud thump against the wall, harder than before, and the windows rattled. I jumped, my finger hovering near the trigger of the shotgun. I peered through the blinds and saw those red eyes again, but this time they were lower, like whatever it was crouched down. It was right outside the window, so close I could almost feel its presence. I couldn't take it anymore. I swung open the door and stepped onto the porch, raising the shotgun. I fired a warning shot into the air, the blast echoing through the silence. I expected it to run, but it didn't even flinch. Those red eyes just stared back at me, unmoving. I felt a chill down my spine. Whatever this was, it wasn't afraid of me or the gun. I backed into the house, slamming the door shut and locking it. I leaned against it, breathing hard, my whole body trembling. My dog was hiding under the table, shaking. I waited there for what felt like hours, listening. The footsteps started up again, circling, but they seemed slower now, more distant. Around 10 o'clock, I gathered the courage to look out the window one more time. The snow was still falling lightly, and in the glow from the porch light, I saw it clearly. An 8-foot-tall, dark brown, hairy creature leaning against the window pane. Its breath was fogging up the glass, and I could see the details of its matted fur and those piercing red eyes. It was just standing there, watching me, like it had all the time in the world. Then, after a moment, it pushed off from the window and walked away, its movements smooth and silent despite its size. It disappeared into the trees, and everything went quiet. I stayed up most of the night, too scared to sleep, but nothing else happened. The next morning, when I checked outside, the footprints were gone, covered by fresh snow, and there was no sign of anything. Since then, it's been silent. No sounds, no sightings, nothing, but the terror of that day has stuck with me. I still startle at every noise, and I keep the blinds closed most of the time. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will, but I know one thing. I'm not alone out here. And whatever that thing was, it wasn't just passing through, it was watching me. And I'll never forget the feeling of those red eyes on me. Story 15. Okay. So, I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to share it somewhere. People might get it. This happened a few years back, and I still think about it all the time. I was on a horseback trip with my buddy and this guide we hired, up in Northern California near the Hooper Reservation. We were exploring the Salmon River in Humboldt County, and honestly, it was supposed to be this chill, nature-filled day. Just us, the horses and the river. But it turned into something else entirely. Something that left me feeling raw and scared in a way I'd never felt before. We started out early in the morning, maybe around 8 o'clock. The air was cool and damp, with that earthy smell you only get in deep forests, pine needles, wet soil, and a hint of river mist. I remember the sound of the horses' hooves crunching on the trail, a steady rhythm that usually calms me down. My horse was this sturdy bay gelding, and my friend was on a smaller mare. The guide, This older guy, who'd been working in the area for decades, led the way on a big dun horse. He didn't talk much, just pointed out things like animal tracks or interesting plants. But there was something about him that made me think he'd seen a lot out here. We rode for about an hour and a half, following the river as it twisted through the trees. The sunlight filtered through the canopy in patches, making the water sparkle where it hit. It was beautiful, but there was this underlying tension I couldn't shake. Maybe it was the silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that feels heavy, like something's watching you. I kept glancing around, half expecting to see a deer or a bear, but nothing moved except us and the river. Then we stopped to let the horses drink. The guide pulled up near a shallow part of the riverbank, and we dismounted. My friend and I stretched our legs while the horses dipped their heads into the water. That's when things got weird. My horse, the bay gelding, started acting up. He'd been calm the whole ride, but suddenly he was sidestepping, snorting, and his ears were pinned back. I could feel the tension in his body through the reins, like he was ready to bolt. I held him tight, trying to soothe him, but he kept pulling away, his eyes wide and white-rimmed. The guide watched him closely, not saying anything, just nodding like he'd seen this before. That's when I saw it. Across the river, maybe 60 or 70 yards away, there was this tall, dark figure standing among the trees. At first, I thought it was a shadow or a trick of the light, but it moved. It was ape-like, but way bigger than any gorilla I've seen in zoos, tall and bulky, with long arms that hung down almost to its knees. Its color was pitch black, like it absorbed the light around it, and it stood there perfectly still, just watching us. My heart started hammering in my chest, and I felt this cold sweat break out on my back. I whispered to my friend, "Do you see that?" He nodded, his face pale. The guide didn't seem surprised. He bent down, picked up a rock from the riverbank, and threw it across the water. It wasn't an aggressive throw, more like a test. The rock landed with a splash near where the thing was standing, but it didn't flinch, not even a twitch. It just stood there for another second, then turned and slipped back into the trees so smoothly it was like it melted into the forest. No sound, no rustle, nothing. The whole thing lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. We all stood there in silence for a minute, the horses still skittish. My friend finally said, "What the hell was that?" But the guide just shook his head and said, "Seen it before. Let's keep moving." His calmness freaked me out more than the creature itself. How could he be so casual about it? We mounted up again, and I could feel my hands shaking as I gripped the reins. The rest of the ride upstream was tense, every little noise. A branch snapping, the river gurgling, made me jump. I kept scanning the trees, half expecting to see those dark eyes again. About 20 minutes later, we spotted it again. This time we were riding along a narrower part of the trail, closer to the riverbank. The guide pointed upstream, and there it was, walking along the opposite bank. It was moving over rocks and fallen logs like it was nothing, effortless and graceful in a way that didn't seem natural. We were closer now, maybe 40 yards away, and I got a better look. It was massive, taller than a man, with a broad chest and shoulders that looked like they could crush anything. Its skin wasn't furry like I'd imagined Bigfoot would be. It was more like dark, rough hide, almost leathery. Its arms swung as it walked, and I could see how muscular they were. It didn't look at us directly, but I felt like it knew we were there. The guide reined in his horse and just watched, like he was studying it. My friend muttered, "This is insane," and I couldn't agree more. I felt this primal fear creeping up my spine, the kind that makes you want to run and hide. We didn't stay long. The guide nudged his horse forward, and we followed. The rest of the ride to the cabins was quiet, but the air felt thick with unease. The cabins were this rustic set of buildings near the river where we were supposed to spend the day fly fishing before heading back. When we got there, we tied up the horses and unpacked our gear. The guide started setting up for fishing, acting like nothing had happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. We spent the next couple of hours fly fishing. The river was calm here, with deep pools that were supposed to be full of salmon. I tried to focus on casting my line, but my mind kept drifting back to that creature. Every time a fish jumped or the wind rustled the leaves, I'd jerk my head around. Then, around midday, I saw it again. We were standing in the river waist-deep in waders, and I glanced toward the tree line on the opposite bank. There, partially hidden by some ferns, was that same dark shape. It was just standing there, watching us, not moving, not making a sound. I froze, my line dangling in the water. My friend saw it too and whispered, "It's back." The guide noticed our stillness and followed our gaze. He didn't say anything at first. Then he waded back to the bank, grabbed his rifle from his gear, and scanned the trees through the scope. After a minute, he lowered it and said, "Nothing there now." But I knew what I saw. It had been real, and it felt like it was studying us. The rest of the afternoon dragged on. We caught a few fish, but I couldn't enjoy it. The guide's nonchalance was starting to piss me off a little. How could he act like this was normal? As the sun started to dip lower, casting long shadows across the river, we headed back to the cabins to clean up and have some food. We built a small fire outside, and the guide cooked the fish we'd caught. The smell of wood smoke and grilled fish should have been comforting, but I couldn't relax. Every crackle from the fire made me tense up. After we ate, we sat on the porch of the main cabin, just talking quietly. The guide shared a few stories about the area, mostly about wildlife and old legends, but he never directly mentioned what we'd seen. It was like he was avoiding it. As it got darker, the forest came alive with night sounds, owls hooting, crickets chirping, the occasional rustle in the underbrush. But then, around maybe 9 o'clock, the horses started acting up again. They were tied up nearby, and I heard them snorting and stamping their feet. One of them let out this nervous whinny that set my teeth on edge. The guide stood up and grabbed his rifle again, shining a flashlight toward the trees. "Probably just a coyote," he said, but his voice was tighter than before. We all listened, and that's when I heard it. A heavy, shuffling sound from the woods behind the cabins, not like an animal running, but something big moving slowly, deliberately. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stood up and peered into the darkness, and that's when I saw it. A large black shape moving between the trees, maybe 30 feet away. It was too dark to make out details, but I could see its silhouette, tall and bulky, with those long arms. It paused for a second, and I swear I felt its eyes on me. Then, just like before, it vanished. No sound, no movement. It was just gone. We spent the next hour on high alert, but nothing else happened. The guide eventually said we should try to get some sleep, but I knew I wouldn't. We decided to sleep in the cabins instead of tents, and I lay there on a bunk, listening to every little noise. The walls felt thin, and I kept imagining that thing outside, watching us. I must have drifted off eventually, because I woke up to the sound of the guide moving around early the next morning. But wait. No. I need to stick to that one day. Let me correct myself. This all happened in one long, terrifying day. So after the incident on the porch, we didn't sleep much. We just waited for dawn. But since it's the same day, I'll fast forward a bit. Later that evening, after the porch incident, we were packing up to head back when the guide went to check the water line, a PVC pipe that ran from a spring to the cabins for fresh water. That's when we found it crushed, completely flattened, like something incredibly heavy had stomped on it. The pipe was buried a few inches under the soil, but it was smashed in multiple places, and the ground around it was disturbed, with deep impressions that didn't look like any animal track I'd ever seen. The guide examined it, then looked at us and said, "Yeah, this happens. Don't worry about it." But his eyes told a different story. He was uneasy too. That was the moment that sealed it for me. All day, I'd been trying to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was a bear, a trick of the light, my imagination, but that crushed waterline was real, physical proof. Whatever it was, it had been here, and it was strong enough to destroy something like that without making a sound. We finished packing in silence and rode back to the trailhead, the whole way feeling like we were being followed. I kept looking over my shoulder, but I never saw it again. The guide dropped us off, and as we were leaving, he said, "This area, it's got its secrets. You learn to live with it." But I haven't learned to live with it. To this day, I can't explain what we saw, and I still get chills thinking about that dark shape moving through the trees. It wasn't just a story, it was real, and it left me with this deep, primal fear that I carry with me everywhere. I've told a few people about it, but most don't believe me. That's why I'm sharing it here, because if anyone understands, it's you guys. Thanks for listening. Story 16. It was one of those Sundays that just sort of drags on. You know? The kind where the afternoon feels like it's been going on for 3 days. This was back in October, a few years ago now. But I remember it like it was last week. The leaves had turned but hadn't all fallen yet. So there was this patchwork of red and orange and yellow out the kitchen window. My husband, Mike, was away on a fishing trip with his buddies up in Wisconsin, so it was just me and my mother-in-law, Carol, at the house. We'd finished up a late dinner, just some leftover lasagna, and had settled in at the kitchen table to play cards. Gin rummy. We always play gin rummy. The table is this old, heavy oak thing that belonged to my grandparents, and it's got these little dings and stains that I've known my whole life. We were sitting there, under the warm glow of the overhead light, with our coffee mugs and a small bowl of pretzels between us. The deck of cards was a little sticky, the way they get after a few hands. I remember the sound they made, a soft thwip as I dealt them out. It was completely dark outside. I'd pulled the blinds down earlier, but they're the old-fashioned kind, the vinyl slats, and they don't fit perfectly in the window frame. There's always a gap of about 1 inch at the bottom and on both sides. You can see slivers of the backyard if you're looking for it, but mostly you just forget it's there. We were on our 3rd or 4th game. Carol was winning as usual. She'd just laid down a run of hearts and was looking pretty pleased with herself. I was studying my hand, trying to figure out if I should hold on to this stupid 9 of clubs or not. When I saw something move outside, it was just a flicker in my peripheral vision through that gap on the right side of the window, a shift in the darkness. I didn't even really turn my head at first. We get deer in the yard all the time, and raccoons, and once a possum that scared the hell out of me when I was taking the trash out. I figured it was probably one of them, but then it moved again. This wasn't a graceful, bounding motion like a deer. It was slower, more deliberate, a solid kind of movement. I looked up from my cards. "Did you see that?" I asked Carol. She followed my gaze toward the window. "See what?" "I don't know. Something moved out there." We both stared at the window. The blinds were closed, but that narrow vertical strip of glass was like a dark movie screen. For a second, there was nothing. Just the deep black of a moonless October night. The little yard light we have on the garage wasn't on. The bulb had blown out a couple days before, and I kept forgetting to get Mike to change it. Then, something filled that gap. It wasn't a face. Not at first. It was just a shape, darker than the darkness around it, blocking out the faint ambient light from the neighbor's house way down the road. My brain scrambled to make sense of it. A dog? A really big raccoon? But it was too tall, too upright. It shifted, and then I saw the eye, a single reddish-brown eye peering through the slit between the blind and the window frame. It was low down, lower than a man's would be. The light from the kitchen hit it just right, and it reflected back at us a sharp, intelligent gleam. It wasn't a flat reflection like an animal's eye sometimes is at night. This was different. It seemed to be looking in, not just reacting to the light. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't make a sound. I just sat there, frozen, my hand clutching my cards so tight the edges dug into my palm. Carol saw it a second later. I heard her sharp intake of breath, a little gasp that was more air than sound. The thing outside moved again, and its face came fully into view. It pressed its face right against the glass, in the space where the blinds didn't cover it. The head was large, way too large for its body, and it was covered in dark, matted hair. But the face itself wasn't as hairy. It was a grayish-brown color, like wet clay with a flat nose and a heavy brow. And those eyes. Now I could see both of them. They were that same reddish-brown, and they were fixed on us with a deep, unnerving curiosity. It was a young one. I know that sounds crazy to say, but you could just tell. It was only about 4 feet tall, I'd guess. It had these long, lanky arms that hung down by its sides, and its shoulders were slumped forward. Its hair was a mess, all tangled and clumped with what looked like bits of leaves or twigs. It didn't look angry. It didn't look threatening. It looked curious, like we were the most interesting thing it had ever seen. It tilted its head to the side just a little. The movement was slow, fluid. It was studying us. I could see the condensation from its breath fogging up a tiny patch of the cold window pane. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I felt dizzy. My mouth was desert dry. I could feel every single beat of my pulse in my neck and my temples. This wasn't fear like when you almost have a car accident, that sharp, adrenaline-fueled panic. This was a deep, cold, sinking terror. It was the fear of seeing something that wasn't supposed to be real, something that shouldn't exist, standing 3 feet away from you, separated only by a pane of glass. I glanced at Carol. Her face was white as a sheet. Her cards were trembling in her hand. We were both statues. I think we were both afraid that if we moved, if we even blinked, it would do something, smash the glass, let out a scream, something. The silence was the worst part. The house was dead quiet. The only sounds were the low hum of the refrigerator and the frantic thumping of my own heart in my ears. This thing, whatever it was, made no sound at all. No breathing, no grunt, no rustle of leaves outside. It was just there. It held our gaze for what felt like an hour. In reality, it was probably only about 10 seconds. 10 of the longest seconds of my entire life. Then, as slowly as it had appeared, it stepped back. It didn't turn and run. It didn't vanish. It just took a single silent step backwards, merging with the darkness so seamlessly, it was like it had been erased. 1 second its face was there, those weirdly intelligent eyes watching us, and the next, the gap in the blinds was just an empty strip of black night again. I still didn't move. Neither did Carol. We just stared at the window, waiting for it to come back. My ears were straining, trying to pick up any sound from outside. A footstep, a snapped twig, anything. But there was nothing. Absolute, total silence. Finally, I forced myself to look away from the window and over at Carol. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted slightly. She looked as terrified as I felt. "We need to lock the doors," I whispered. My voice was hoarse, barely audible. She just nodded, a quick jerky motion. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the linoleum floor, and the sound was explosively loud in the quiet kitchen. I stood up, my legs feeling like wet noodles, and went to the back door. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely get the deadbolt to turn. I flipped the little lock on the doorknob too, for good measure. Then I went to the front door and did the same, checking the peephole into the empty, dark front porch before I locked it. When I came back to the kitchen, Carol was still sitting at the table. She had put her cards down. Her hands were clasped together in her lap, but I could see them shaking. I sat back down. For a long time, we didn't say anything. We just sat there in the bright, safe-looking kitchen, listening to the hum of the fridge. The normalcy of the room felt like a lie. The half-finished game of cards, the coffee mugs, the bowl of pretzels, it all seemed like a stage set, and the real world was that silent, curious thing that had been watching us from the dark. What was that? Carol finally asked, her voice thin and shaky. I don't know, I said, and I really truly didn't. My mind was racing, trying to fit what I'd seen into a box I understood. A bear? No. The face was all wrong, the posture was all wrong. A person in a costume, out here in the middle of nowhere on a cold October night, pressing their face against my kitchen window for 10 seconds and then vanishing without a sound. It made no sense. And the eyes, I'll never forget those eyes. They weren't human eyes. We should call someone, she said, but it was a question more than a statement. Who would we call? I asked. The police? And say what? That a 4-foot-tall thing was looking in our window? They'd think we're crazy. We fell silent again. The rational part of my brain was fighting a losing battle with what my eyes had seen. Maybe it was a sick animal, maybe it was a trick of the light, but I knew it wasn't. I knew what I saw. Carol saw it too. We had both seen the same impossible thing. I got up and walked over to the window, my heart back in my throat. I didn't want to get close to it, but I had to. I stood to the side, pressed against the wall, and slowly, carefully, used one finger to pull back a single slat of the blind. The backyard was empty. Just the dark shapes of the trees at the edge of the property and the lumpy shadow of the woodpile. Nothing moved. There was no sign that anything had ever been there, but I felt it. A presence, a feeling of being watched that was so strong it was almost a physical pressure. I let the blind snap back into place and hurried away from the window. We ended up staying at that table for another 2 hours, just talking in hushed voices, trying to piece it together, trying to find some logical explanation that would let us sleep that night. We drank more coffee, but it just made me jittery on top of being terrified. Every little creak and groan of the old house made us jump. The wind picked up a little, whistling softly under the eaves, and every time it did, my stomach clenched. We talked about everything and nothing. We talked about what Mike would say when we told him. We talked about the weather. We talked about the card game we'd been playing, but our eyes kept drifting back to that window. Eventually, we had to go to bed. Neither of us wanted to. The thought of being upstairs in the dark away from the main floor was terrifying, but we couldn't sit at the kitchen table forever. I made Carol take the guest room right next to mine. I checked the locks on all the windows upstairs, something I never normally do. I left the hall light on. I lay in bed for what felt like the whole night, staring at the ceiling, listening to every single sound the house and the night made. Every rustle of leaves outside was that thing moving. Every creak of a floorboard was it coming inside. I didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, the sun came up like nothing had happened. It was a bright, crisp October day. The world looked normal and sane. Mike came home around noon, smelling of lake water and beer, full of stories about the one that got away. Carol and I looked at each other, and without saying a word, we had an agreement. We didn't tell him. Not then. What would we even say? How do you start that conversation? Hey, honey, welcome home. By the way, a juvenile Bigfoot was watching your mom and me play gin rummy last night. It sounded insane even in my own head. Later that day, when the sun was high and the backyard was flooded with light, I went outside. I walked over to the kitchen window. The grass was damp with dew. I looked at the ground beneath the window, searching for footprints, for any sign at all. The ground was soft there, from a recent rain, and I saw them. They weren't clear, not like in the movies. They were messy, blurred impressions, but they were there. 2 of them. They were broad, and I couldn't make out toes, but they were too big to be a dog's and the wrong shape for a deer. They were just footprints, and they were right where it would have been standing. I never saw it again. Carol never saw it again. We've talked about it a few times since, always in hushed tones, always with that same unease. The memory of it hasn't faded. If anything, it's gotten sharper. It's the curiosity in its eyes that haunts me the most. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't roaring or beating its chest. It was just looking. It was a kid in its own way. seeing something strange and new and wanting to get a closer look, and that somehow is so much scarier because it means it was thinking, it was conscious, and it's still out there. Now, every time I sit at that kitchen table after dark, I feel a prickle on the back of my neck. I can't help but glance at that little gap in the blinds, and I always make sure the yard light is working. Story 17. I'd been out there for a day already, just hiking and setting up camp near a creek. The first day was normal, quiet, peaceful, the kind of solitude I craved. But on that second day, things started feeling off. I remember waking up that morning. The air was crisp, and the sun was barely peeking through the trees. I packed up my gear and decided to scout around for a better spot, since I planned to stay another night. That's when I started noticing weird stuff. While I was walking along these game trails, I saw overturned rocks. Not like an animal had dug them up, more like someone had deliberately flipped them over. They were big, heavy rocks, the kind you'd need some strength to move. And then I saw the prints. Barefoot prints, but huge. I mean massive. Each one was longer than my boot, and I wear a size 11. They were sunk deep into the mud, like whatever made them was heavy, really heavy. I tried to tell myself it was a bear, but bears don't walk on 2 feet like that, and their prints don't look humanoid. These did. They had a shape kinda like a human foot, but wider, with toes that splayed out. I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just a big animal, I thought. Still, I decided to set up camp early, closer to the creek where I had a clear view around me. I spent the afternoon gathering firewood and setting up my tent. The whole time, I had this uneasy feeling, like I was being watched. You know that prickling on the back of your neck? It was there, constant. I kept hearing rustling in the trees, but whenever I looked, nothing was there. I figured it was squirrels or birds, but the sounds were heavier, like something big moving through the underbrush. By evening, I had a fire going, and I was cooking some dinner, just dehydrated stuff, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As it got darker, the noises got louder, not just rustling now, but snaps and cracks, like branches breaking. They were coming from the tree line, maybe 50 yards away. I'd shine my flashlight over there, and the sounds would stop for a minute, then start up again, closer each time. My heart was starting to race. I've been in the woods enough to know what normal animal sounds are, and this wasn't it. This was deliberate, like something was circling me. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was probably a moose or a bear curious about my camp. But deep down I knew. The prints from earlier kept popping into my head. Around maybe 10 o'clock I decided to turn in early, hoping that whatever it was would lose interest. I zipped myself into my tent with my rifle right beside me. It's a .30-06, something I always bring for protection, but I've never had to use it. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by this low growl. It wasn't like a bear's growl. It was deeper, more guttural, and it seemed to vibrate through the ground. Then I heard footsteps. Heavy, thudding footsteps, multiple sets, moving around my tent. I could hear them crunching on the pine needles and dirt, getting closer. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt cold sweat break out all over my body. I grabbed my rifle, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold it steady. I unzipped the tent flap just enough to peek out. The fire was still burning low, casting flickering shadows. That's when I saw them, shadows moving between the trees, big and dark. I couldn't make out details, but they were tall, way taller than a person. One of them let out another growl, and this time it was louder, right outside my tent. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I could smell something too, a musky, earthy smell like wet fur and dirt. It was thick in the air, making me gag. I don't know how long I stayed like that, crouched in my tent, too scared to move. The footsteps kept circling, sometimes stopping right outside, like they were listening. I could hear breathing, heavy, ragged breathing. It wasn't human. After what felt like forever, I knew I had to do something. I figured if I stayed in the tent, I was a sitting duck. So I slowly, carefully crawled out, keeping low to the ground with my rifle aimed into the darkness. I moved over to the fire, thinking the light might keep them back. Big mistake. As soon as I got there, the growling intensified, and I heard rocks hitting the ground near me, not thrown randomly, aimed. One whizzed past my head and thudded into a tree behind me. Then branches started flying, snapping as they landed around the camp. I ducked, my knees buckling under me. I was terrified, but I forced myself to look toward the creek. That's when I saw it. Across the creek, maybe 30 feet away, this massive figure stepped out from the trees. It was silhouetted by the moonlight, so I couldn't see details, but it was huge, at least 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long arms that hung down almost to its knees. It stood there, just staring at me. Behind it, I could see smaller shapes moving, pacing back and forth. They were maybe 5 or 6 feet tall, like a family group. The big one let out this roar. It was deafening, echoing through the valley. I felt it in my bones, this deep, primal fear that made my legs go weak. I raised my rifle, aiming at the big one. My finger was on the trigger, but I didn't pull it. I was too scared of what would happen if I did. What if there were more of them? What if they attacked? I've never been so frozen in my life. They started circling the camp again, throwing more rocks and branches. One rock hit the fire, sending sparks flying everywhere. I could feel the heat on my face, but I was shivering from the cold and fear. This went on for hours. I lost track of time, but it felt like an eternity. I'd glance at my watch, but the numbers blurred together. I just stood there, back against a tree, rifle pointed out, swinging it around whenever I heard a noise. My arms ached from holding it up, and my eyes were strained from staring into the darkness. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of one of them moving, a shadow darting between trees, or a pair of eyes reflecting the firelight. They never came closer than the creek, but they never left either. It was like they were toying with me, letting me know I was in their space. I could hear them communicating too, not with words, but with grunts and low calls. It sounded almost like a language, but not one I'd ever heard. The musky smell was overwhelming, making it hard to breathe. At one point, I thought I was going to pass out from the fear. My mind was racing. What were they? Bigfoot? Something else? I'd heard stories, but I never believed them. Now I had no choice. As the night dragged on, I started to feel this weird sense of dread mixed with curiosity. Why weren't they attacking? Were they just warning me off? I thought about the overturned rocks and the prints from earlier. Maybe I'd stumbled into their territory, and they were defending it. That thought made me even more scared, because if that was true, I was intruding, and they weren't happy about it. Finally, after what felt like forever, the sky started to lighten. Dawn was coming. The noises began to fade, and the figures retreated back into the trees. The big one was the last to go. It let out one more low growl, then turned and disappeared into the forest. Just like that, they were gone. The silence that followed was almost as terrifying as the noise. It was too quiet, like the woods were holding their breath. I didn't waste any time. As soon as I was sure they were gone, I started packing up. My hands were still shaking, and I fumbled with my gear, dropping things left and right. I didn't even bother to put out the fire properly, just kicked some dirt over it. I stuffed everything into my backpack, not caring if it was neat, and started hiking out. The whole time I felt eyes on me. That prickling sensation was back, stronger than ever. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see them following me, but I never did. The hike out was the longest of my life. Every sound made me jump, a bird chirping, a branch cracking under my own feet. I was drenched in sweat, and my heart wouldn't slow down. I didn't stop until I reached my truck, miles away. When I finally got there, I threw my gear in the back and drove off without looking back. That was months ago, and I still can't shake the feeling. I haven't gone camping since, and I doubt I ever will. Every time I close my eyes, I see that silhouette across the creek, hear that roar, I don't know what they were, but I'm convinced it was a family group, and I intruded on their home. The dread has stuck with me, like a shadow I can't escape. I've told a few people, but most don't believe me. I don't blame them. I wouldn't have believed it either if I hadn't lived it, but I did, and now I'm left with this emptiness and fear that won't go away. Story 18. My old Ford Ranger was humming along, just me and the radio, playing some classic rock station that was fading in and out. The air coming through the window was cool, that damp, leafy smell you only get in the fall up here. I remember my back was aching a little from sitting for so long, and I was just starting to think about my bed, about how good it would feel to just collapse into it. I was in that zone you get into on a long, dark drive, where your brain is just barely engaged, just enough to keep the truck between the lines. I was coming up on this area they call White Hole. It's not a town, not even a wide spot in the road, just a name on a map for a stretch where the trees pull back a bit and there are these big power lines cutting through. On one side of the road, there's a steep bank going up, all rocks and roots, and on the other side, a steep drop-off into the woods with one of those low metal guardrails that's more of a suggestion than anything else. My high beams were on, cutting 2 tunnels of light through the absolute blackness. And that's when I saw them, up ahead on the right-hand shoulder, right where the ground falls away. I saw what I thought were a couple of big, thick logs. It was weird, because the road crew had been through recently, and I was sure they'd cleared all the debris. My first thought was, great, someone's trailer lost its load, and I eased my foot off the gas just a touch. I got closer, maybe 100 yards out, and the shape of it started to bother me. Logs don't usually look like that. They were too vertical, and there was a space between them. It wasn't a pile. It was 2 separate things, 50 yards now, and my brain was trying to catch up to my eyes. It wasn't logs. It was a single massive shape, darker than the darkness around it, just standing there on the gravel shoulder. My foot went for the brake, not a slam, but a steady pressure, and the truck slowed right down. I was maybe 30, 40 feet away when my headlights finally washed over it completely. It was a creature. I don't know how else to say it. It was covered in hair, a deep, shaggy black that seemed to eat the light. It was standing on 2 legs, fully upright, and it was huge, not like a bear on its hind legs, all awkward and top-heavy. This was solid. Its shoulders were unbelievable, like a powerlifter's, but even bigger, just these mounds of muscle and fur that tapered down to a narrower waist. It had to be at least 6 feet tall, maybe more. Its head was kind of blocky, and I couldn't see any neck. It was just set right on those massive shoulders. But the thing that froze the air in my lungs was that it was looking at me. I couldn't see its eyes, not clearly, but I knew. The way its head was angled right toward my truck. The feeling was like a physical blow, a jolt of pure electricity that went from my scalp down to my toes. This wasn't a deer caught in the headlights. This was a conscious, intelligent awareness. It knew I was there. It was assessing me. My truck was almost at a crawl now, just rolling forward. Time didn't slow down. It just got thick like wading through syrup. I was holding my breath, my hands locked on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Just like my dad taught me, I couldn't have looked away if I wanted to. And then it moved. It turned its body, not just its head, toward the guardrail. It took a step, a single, fluid step. The guardrail was about 3 feet high, one of those corrugated metal ones. I've seen guys trip over curbs lower than that. This thing didn't climb it, it didn't vault it, it just stepped over it. I'm not exaggerating. It lifted one leg, a leg that was thick and powerful, and placed its foot on the other side of the rail as easily as I'd step over a puddle. There was no effort, no strain. It was a motion of pure, terrifying power and grace. Its other leg followed, and just like that, it was on the other side, on the steep, wooded embankment that dropped away from the road. It paused for a half second, one last look in my direction, and then it was gone. It didn't run. It just melted into the trees under those power lines. One moment it was there, a solid, physical thing, and the next the darkness had swallowed it whole. There was no sound, no cracking branches, no rustling leaves, nothing, just silence. My foot, which had been hovering over the brake, finally stomped down, and I brought the truck to a complete stop right where I'd seen it. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. I was breathing in these short, ragged gasps. I fumbled for the window switch and rolled it up, my hands shaking so bad I almost hit the lock button instead. I just sat there, staring into the empty blackness where it had vanished. The woods suddenly didn't look like woods anymore. They looked like a wall, a living, breathing wall that had just opened up and taken something back inside. I don't know how long I sat there. A minute? 5? My mind was a scrambled mess. Bear, it tried to insist. It was a big black bear. But I've seen bears. I've hunted my whole life. I know what a bear looks like. A bear doesn't stand that straight. A bear doesn't have shoulders like a linebacker. A bear doesn't step over a 3-foot guardrail like it's a crack in the sidewalk. This was different. This was wrong. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, making me jump so high I hit my head on the roof. It was my friend, Mark. I'd completely forgotten. He was waiting for me at his place. His car had died, and he needed a jump. The real world came crashing back in, loud and jarring. I answered, my voice a dry croak. "Yeah," I managed. I'm on my way. Be there in 10. I didn't tell him. What was I going to say? "Hey, sorry I'm late. I just saw Bigfoot." He'd have thought I was drunk or lost my mind. I put the truck in drive and pulled away, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror until the spot was long out of sight. The rest of the night was a blur. I helped Mark get his car started. I was on autopilot, my hands doing the work, while my brain was still back on that stretch of road. He was talking about the Patriots game or something, and I was just nodding, saying, "Uh-huh." But I wasn't hearing a word. All I could see was that dark shape, that effortless step, the feeling of being seen by it. It wasn't a feeling of being hunted, not exactly. It was a feeling of being acknowledged, like I was a minor detail in its landscape, and it had decided to let me pass. I got home around 2 in the morning. I didn't sleep. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, playing the whole thing over and over in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The way the fur moved with its muscles, the sheer bulk of it. The silence. By the time the sun came up, I felt like I was going crazy. I needed to talk to someone who wouldn't just laugh me out of the room. I did a search online for weird creature sightings Vermont, and eventually found a forum. I sent a private message to a guy who called himself a researcher. I figured he'd be some nut job in a tinfoil hat, but I was desperate. I gave him the bare bones of what happened, the location, the time. To my surprise, he wrote back within an hour. He was serious. He asked a bunch of specific questions. How tall was the guardrail? What was the gate like? Did it seem to have a neck? He didn't treat me like I was insane. He said he'd had other reports from that same area over the years. He asked if I'd be willing to go back with him to look for evidence. My stomach dropped at the thought. Go back there? In the daylight? The idea made my skin crawl. But the need for answers, for some kind of validation, was stronger than the fear. I agreed to meet him that afternoon. His name was Gary. He was a normal-looking guy, maybe in his 50s, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. He drove a beat-up Subaru full of gear, cameras, plaster kits, measuring tapes. He didn't have a crazy look in his eye. He looked like an electrician or a plumber. It made me feel a little better. We drove out to the spot in my truck. The sun was out, and it was a crisp, beautiful fall day. It looked completely different. Just a road, just some trees. The terror of the night felt distant, almost silly. We parked on the shoulder, right where I'd stopped. Gary was quiet, methodical. He walked the area, his eyes on the ground. I stood by the truck, my arms crossed, feeling exposed. The woods didn't feel like a wall anymore, but they felt watchful. "Over here," Gary said, his voice low. I walked over to where he was crouched by the guardrail on the wooded side. The ground was soft there, a mix of dirt and gravel that had washed down from the road. And there they were, footprints. Big, rounded footprints, sunk deep into the earth. They were huge. Gary laid his tape measure next to one. It was over 16 inches long. My own boot looked like a child's next to it. The print was wide, with a clear ball and heel and 5 distinct toes. They weren't clawed like a bear's. They were almost human, but not quite. The arch was different, flatter. Gary didn't say anything for a long time. He just took pictures from every angle. Then he got out his plaster kit and started mixing the powder with water in a bucket. The whole time, a cold dread was seeping back into me. This was real. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't a bear. Something had been here. Something massive and heavy had stood right where we were standing. He poured the plaster into the best-preserved print. We waited for it to set, sitting on the guardrail. The silence was heavy. I could hear the buzz of the power lines above us. It was the only sound. "The step you described," Gary finally said, not looking at me. "Over the rail. That's consistent. They're incredibly strong. People don't understand the power it takes to move a body that size with that kind of fluidity. It's not just strength. It's a different kind of physiology." He carefully lifted the cast out of the ground. It was a perfect negative of the footprint, a heavy white sculpture of something that shouldn't exist. He held it up, turning it in the light. "I've seen tracks like this before," he said. "Up near Maidstone, a couple over in the Green Mountain National Forest. Same shape, same size." He packed the cast carefully in a box with foam. We got back in the truck. He was calm, almost clinical. For him, this was data. For me, it was a nightmare confirmed. He dropped me off at my place. I took the cast inside and set it on my kitchen table. I just stared at it. This lump of plaster was proof. It was a tangible thing that connected my insane story to the real world. But instead of feeling relief, I felt a deeper, more profound fear. The fear of the unknown wasn't gone. It was just validated. Knowing that it was real, that something that big, that powerful, that other, was living in the woods I'd driven past my whole life, changed everything. The woods weren't just woods anymore. They were a place where the rules I understood didn't always apply. The terror of that night wasn't just about the sighting itself. It was about the moment I realized that the world is a lot bigger and a lot stranger than I'd ever allowed myself to believe. That was 3 years ago. The plaster cast is still in my garage, wrapped in an old towel on a shelf. I don't look at it much. I don't need to. Every time I drive Route 4 at night, my high beams sweeping that same stretch of guardrail near White Hole, my hands tighten on the wheel. I slow down, just a little, and I look. I always look. I don't know what I'm more afraid of, seeing it again, or the thought that I might never see it again and spend the rest of my life wondering what it was, knowing that the only proof I have is a heavy piece of plaster sitting in the dark, and a memory of something covered in black hair, stepping over a metal rail like it wasn't even there.